Matthew Singletary's perfect life shatters when his drone captures his wife, Faye, in a shocking affair with her friends, Taylor and Brianna. The betrayal fuels a cold, relentless revenge. Matthew confronts Faye, exposing her infidelity to her boss, family, and friends. Her world crumbles. Job gone, reputation destroyed. But Matthew isn't done yet. This isn't just revenge. It's the destruction of everything Faye once held dear. The frosted glass door read, Matthew J. Singletary, Director of Corporate Systems Analysis. That's me, Matt. At 29, I was a confident, respected businessman, the go-to troubleshooter for Donaldson Enterprises. My boss used me like a hired gun, sending me to various branches to clean up messes. I had the authority to make significant changes, and Mr. Donaldson almost always backed me. Despite my success at work, my personal life was less smooth. The day after Independence Day, the office closed early. Excited, I rushed home to test my new Shaba drone, a birthday gift from my wife, Faye. I called her, hoping she'd join me, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Faye was a junior real estate agent, and though I was a bit annoyed, I decided not to wait. I set up the drone on our driveway, impressed by its stealth and the high-quality video feed. After a few test flights, I took it inside, connecting the feed to my large screen. From the comfort of my desk, I flew the drone over the neighborhood, soaring 40 feet above the streets, enjoying the view. I started to relax, flying the drone and recalling the days when Uncle Jake taught me to fly. Those were some of the best years of my life, but flying had become too costly. Now this drone was my closest connection to the sky, and I loved it. As I flew it unnoticed over the neighborhood, I saw people absorbed in their daily lives, unaware of my quiet, small drone. Hovering near a brick home, I avoided getting too close to Kelly Sanderson's place. Kelly was known for her flirtatious nature, and she made me uneasy. Turning the drone west, I flew it over the nicer homes, then decided to head back home. But as I turned, a flash of red caught my eye near Taylor Henning's house. It was Faye's Lexus. I zoomed in, confirming it was her car. My gut clenched with a sense of foreboding. I steered the drone toward the backyard and lowered it. There by the pool were Faye, Taylor, and Brianna, naked. Shock hit me hard. I forced myself to watch, letting the betrayal sink in. My emotions numbed as I questioned why Faye chose Taylor, who didn't seem impressive. I realized there was much I didn't know about my wife, and anger began to fuel my thoughts. Our marriage, which I thought was solid, had clearly been an illusion. Faye and I had been together for almost 5 years, married for 3. I thought our relationship was solid, with no arguments or distance between us. But now, seeing her betrayal, I knew our marriage was over. I couldn't think of any justification for what she did, and I realized I had to move on. Determined to make them face the consequences, I checked the drone's recording. The footage was clear and incriminating, evidence I would need for a divorce. I knew the process wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't going to let them get away with it. As I maneuvered the drone closer, Brianna noticed it, her shock spreading to Faye and Taylor. They scrambled in panic, and I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. I flew the drone higher, taunting them with its movements, before letting the battery die and sending it into a dive. The screen went dark, and I was left staring at it, filled with anger and betrayal. My life had fallen apart at 12:38 p.m. on Friday, July 5th. Almost an hour later, Faye returned home, furious. I remembered how hard we worked for our house, how much she got out of our life together. A new car, everything she wanted, while I was left with nothing but this drone and a shattered marriage. As she burst through the door, soaking wet and seething, I knew things would never be the same. Faye stormed in, still in her work suit, now stained and disheveled, one heel in hand and the other still on her foot. "What were you thinking?" she screamed, her face red with fury. It was clear she had figured out the broken drone was my doing. I let out a small laugh, which only made her angrier. "You could have killed someone with that thing," she yelled. I watched her, feeling distant. The woman I had married seemed gone. Faye, normally charming and pretty, now looked like a stranger, soaked and furious. "What's wrong with you?" she shouted again. I had expected an apology, but instead, I matched her tone, roaring back, "You cheated on me!" My voice was deep and commanding, and it got her attention. "Go upstairs and wash off whatever you did with them," I added with an edge of bitterness. She hesitated, but then limped upstairs. "And Faye," I called after her in a calmer voice, "when you come back, speak to me with respect. You've disrespected our marriage enough today." She didn't reply, but obeyed. After a quick shower, she returned wearing one of my old sweatshirts, trying to appear modest. "Sit down," I said, motioning to the couch. As she started to speak, I cut her off. "Why did you decide to cheat?" I asked calmly, though my frustration was evident. Faye tried to justify her actions, apologizing not for what she did, but because I caught her. She suggested we could move past it, as if it was just a minor mistake. Her excuses only fueled my anger. "It was just sex," she insisted, but I wasn't buying it. "If it was so much fun, why wasn't I included?" I mocked. Faye looked down, showing a flicker of regret, mumbling something about bringing me in eventually. "Oh, bring me in?" I asked, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "Was the plan to let me join your secret club someday?" I asked sarcastically. Faye didn't respond immediately, so I continued. "Bullshit. You never intended to tell me. You just made that up after getting caught." Faye looked down, murmuring, "You're right. We didn't think we should include you from the start." I cut her off before she could finish. "You should have asked if this was something we should consider as a married couple. Shouldn't you have, Faye?" She retorted angrily. "Okay, yeah, I messed up. I'm sorry." "Yes, you did," I agreed. "You decided to break our vows on your own. Why didn't I get a say in that?" She looked frustrated but pleaded. "Baby, it's not too late. We can't change what happened, but we can move forward." I shrugged. "Just for the sake of discussion, why didn't you think to talk to me first? What made you think it was okay to make this decision alone?" She waved her hands, clearly struggling for words. "I don't know," she admitted, hanging her head. "I guess I didn't think you'd actually want to join." "Okay, now we're getting somewhere," I said. "You thought I wouldn't want to do it, so why didn't it occur to you that maybe it was wrong?" She didn't answer, just looked more frustrated. I could see she didn't want to talk about right and wrong, so I brought it back to what I had said earlier. "You're the fun ones, the cool ones who know how to have a good time, right?" "That's not how it was," Faye protested. "I just didn't think you would." "Right, you didn't think I would agree, but you did it anyway. Don't I have the right to think that was wrong?" I asked slowly. She shook her head in frustration, trying to change the subject. "Matt, you know I wasn't a virgin when we met. You know who I was seeing back then, and I know who you were with too. Remember Caitlin?" She watched me, waiting for a reaction, but I didn't give her one. She continued, "You can't be mad at what I did with Brianna, right? Or what Taylor did to me. It wasn't anything you haven't done many times, right?" I cut her off. "No, Faye, it's not about the sex. It's about doing it when you shouldn't have." She tried to recover. "But wait, Matt, you said you wouldn't mind being with Brianna. It's not too late to make things right, honey. I messed up by not including you from the start, but we can move on from here." She moved closer, reaching out as if to touch me, but stopped when she saw my anger. "Taylor suggested it, honey. You could have me and Brianna or just one of us alone. Taylor wouldn't be with anyone but his wife for 3 months to make up for the time you missed." She stopped, realizing how bad it all sounded. "So, 3 months is how long this has been going on?" I asked, my anger rising. Faye hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, just 3 months, Matt," she answered, almost pleading. "Can we move on? Want me to call Brianna right now?" "God, no," I snapped. "I wouldn't touch her or you, not now. Who knows what diseases you might have after being with them?" Faye shrank back, stunned by my harshness. I pressed on, demanding to know why she went behind my back. "Why did you do this, Faye, when you knew I would hate it?" She finally snapped. "Because I wanted to. Damn it, Matt, I wanted to break out of this box, and it was fun." She glared at me, defiantly claiming her right to her own body. I stared at her, baffled by her logic. "Faye, when we got married, you agreed that only I could be with you, and I have the right to decide if I can stay married to you after this." Her face froze in shock as I calmly continued. "From where I stand, you've pretty much ended our marriage. There's no point in trying to fix it." She didn't respond, her tears more of frustration than regret. "So, you think you can be with anyone outside our marriage just because you wanted to?" I asked, incredulous. She didn't answer. "Wow, That sums it up, doesn't it? I exclaimed, dripping with sarcasm. Faye couldn't handle it anymore. She screamed, "Screw you!" and ran upstairs. In her mind, I was the one ruining all the fun, being childish and selfish. As she disappeared, I shouted after her, "Remember, Faye, you wanted to do it because it was fun." I retreated to my office, realizing there was no real regret on her part. Maybe she was sorry for getting caught, but that was all. Faye had been lying to me for at least 3 months, maybe longer. She wanted me to forget it all and move on, but I couldn't. They all wanted to avoid consequences, to keep their dirty secret hidden from the world. I wanted everyone to know. I hadn't told Faye everything, but I had learned from those online forums that exposing the affair was the first step. I wasn't sure about fixing my marriage, but I could definitely expose it. I reviewed the footage from the drone, focusing on the part where Faye looked directly at it, her face clear in the shot. That would be the final frame of the video. With plenty of time before 2:30, I called Mr. Rutherford, Faye's boss. "Thank you for calling Rutherford Real Estate," he answered himself, his voice familiar. "Mr. Rutherford, it's Matt Singletary, Faye's husband," I said seriously. He responded warmly, remembering our past conversations. "Sir, do you have an email address?" "I need to send you something urgent," I continued. Within seconds, he gave me his personal email. I sent the video of Faye, Taylor, and Brianna and waited for him to watch it. "My God," he finally said, breathless. "I'm sorry, Matt. I had no idea." "Neither did I, Martin," I replied, calmly pointing out that the affair happened during work hours. I let him know his employees had ruined my marriage, but I didn't mention any lawsuits. Instead, I left the next steps to him. "It's your business, and I'm just bringing this to your attention." After ending the call, I created a group text with all of Faye's family, friends, and neighbors and sent them the same video. The truth was about to shatter their perfect little world. As Faye came down the stairs, she tried to downplay the situation. "Honey, you're making too big a deal out of this. We're all adults, and I love you. I'd never hurt you on purpose. I just made a mistake." I didn't really listen. Nothing she said could change anything. Then the phone rang. Faye looked annoyed but didn't move to answer. "You should get that," I told her. "It's for you." She picked up the phone in the kitchen. "Oh, hi, Dad. Listen, I can't talk right now. Can I call you back?" But her father's voice was loud enough for me to hear. "What are you doing, Faye Ann? What's this video of you with some guy in public?" Faye turned to me, horrified. I reminded her softly, "You did it because you could, because it was fun, right?" She looked at me blankly, stunned as the reality of her actions began to sink in. Faye was getting yelled at by her father, but she seemed too stunned to process it. "Well, baby," I said coldly, "I did this because I could, just like you." I wasn't feeling kind, and I wanted to be cruel. Her phone started ringing with the Star Wars theme. I picked it up, answered, and handed it to her. "This is for you." She took it with her right hand while her dad continued shouting at her from the house phone in her left. Mr. Rutherford was furious too, firing her and her co-worker. He told her to collect her things within half an hour or she'd never get them back. I went outside to load my stuff into the old Land Rover, not caring about the tire marks on the lawn. The house and yard weren't my problem anymore. A few minutes later, Faye stormed out, screaming, "You jerk!" before speeding away in her car. I shrugged. Her opinion no longer mattered to me. My phone beeped repeatedly as replies to the video I'd sent poured in. Faye was getting slammed with angry messages from her family and friends. I packed up the last of my belongings, clothes, guns, and some personal items, fitting everything easily into the Land Rover. On my final walk through the house, I put on a holster, checked my gun, and tucked it under my shirt. The house felt hostile, and I decided to stay armed from then on. I called my parents, briefly explaining what had happened and asking if I could stay with them. They only asked if I'd be there for dinner, reassuring me that I could count on them. Reflecting on that day and the week that followed, I was amazed at how quickly things escalated from calm to chaos. Faye's lack of regret made it clear that saving our marriage wasn't even an option. I didn't waste time debating. I acted quickly, as I always did at work. I realized my love for Faye had faded almost entirely by the end of our talk. What remained was just an echo of what once was, now barely a whisper. Divorce became the obvious solution, partly to escape the debt from our house and Faye's expensive car. My goal was to protect our credit as much as possible. A couple of weeks after everything came to light, I called Faye's dad. He was still angry, but eventually calmed down. We agreed to sell the house quickly before it could go into foreclosure and ruin our credit. The same logic applied to Faye's fancy Lexus. Neither of us could afford to keep it. I told Faye's father that I couldn't continue making payments, so the house needed to be sold quickly. We owed more on both the house and the car than they were worth, but facing it now would save us trouble in the future when our marriage was just a memory. Her father agreed and convinced Faye to go along with the plan, possibly warning her that I'd cash out my $401K and disappear if she didn't. We managed to sell the house fairly quickly. I covered some of the realtor's costs, but it wasn't too bad. I also traded Faye's Lexus for a 6-year-old Ford, paid the difference, and gave her the title. She'd have to handle the insurance and upkeep herself, which I felt was fair. When it was all done, I kept what was left of my $401K and my share of our small savings. The best part was being free of any big debts. We got a DIY divorce because we couldn't afford a lawyer. I filed the paperwork and split things fairly. Surprisingly, Faye agreed quickly, probably under her father's advice. Without children or long enough marriage to qualify for spousal support, the process was straightforward. 4 months after catching Faye with someone else, our divorce was final. I locked away all my feelings and memories of the marriage and moved on. That Christmas, right after the final decree, I spent quietly with my parents. It was good for my soul. We exchanged gifts, had a big turkey dinner, and visited friends and relatives in the evening. A week into the new year, I quit my job at Reese Donaldson. It was a good job, and I was well respected, but I had lost my passion for business. Mr. Donaldson offered me a higher salary to stay, but I declined. He threw me a great farewell party and told me to call him if I ever changed my mind. By Valentine's Day, I was unemployed, unsure about my future, but surprisingly content. I sat at my mom's kitchen table, watching my dad carve a mountain lion from a chunk of wood while Mom cooked dinner. They were both very important to me. Dad, Uncle Tom, wasn't my biological father. He and Aunt Leah took me in after my parents died in a car accident when I was 9. They didn't have kids of their own, and I became their only child. They were kind and loving, helping me heal from the loss of my parents. Uncle Tom was a tough sheriff who had handled all kinds of crime in his county for over 21 years before retiring. One evening, I asked them to adopt me as their son. They held each other and cried, which made me cry too. From then on, they were my mom and dad. Now, they were giving me my inheritance early, the ranch, so I could use it while I was young. They had already bought a big RV and a little Jeep to tow behind, planning to travel the country and visit places like Glacier National Park and the Grand Canyon. But Dad, I said softly, it's too much. You need a place to come back to when you're tired of being on the road. Yep, we know that, son, Dad replied. That's why we bought a house in the north part of the city. It'll be there when we need it, but honestly, your mom and I don't want this place anymore, Dad said. We never planned to farm or raise cattle. We just bought the ranch when I retired and we've never left. Now's our chance. Oh, I see, I said, pretending to be upset. You're giving me the hand-me-down ranch and I'm stuck here, right? Nope, Dad replied calmly. The land here is worn out and most of the springs have dried up. But oil companies are interested, and you could get a good price if you sell. I thought about it. The property had started as 640 acres, with another 300 added later by Grandpa after a good harvest. Over time, Dad sold off parts of it, and we were left with about 500 acres. I agreed to take the ranch, but suggested selling everything and splitting the money 3 ways. Mom quickly countered, "How about an 80-20th split and you send us emails twice a week and call us every Sunday?" She hugged me and added softly, "We love you, son. Let us do this." Dad had already left the room, leaving the discussion in Mom's hands. I tried to negotiate a 50-50th split, but Mom sealed the deal with her original offer. "Deal? Now go get cleaned up for dinner," she ordered. In early April, a year after discovering Faye's betrayal, I stood on the front porch watching my parents drive away in their new RV, ready for their adventures. Once they disappeared over the hill, I sighed and went back inside the house. It didn't feel like home anymore. The house, built around 1930, had been fortified by Dad to make it less appealing to criminals. Inside, it was cozy, with a huge 70-inch 4K TV and top-of-the-line sound system. The backyard featured a large deck, a grill and smoker, and a nice pool where Mom used to swim for exercise. After they left, I took stock of everything on the property: 14 horses, 23 buffalo, and 47 longhorn cattle. Grandpa once considered turning the place into a nature park. I started selling everything except the house's furniture. The first thing to go was a big John Deere tractor, which sold quickly after I parked it by the gate on the state highway. The rest of the farm and ranch equipment sold just as fast. By May, I had cleared out most of the place. Then one Friday, I got a call on the house's landline. Expecting it to be Mom, I answered, "Hello? How y'all doing?" "Good afternoon. Is this Mr. Singletary?" a woman asked, her tone slightly condescending. "Yes, ma'am, it sure is," I replied, playing along. "Please hold for Mr. Wingate," she said before the line went quiet. I hung up. 3 minutes later, the phone rang again. "Mr. Singletary?" the same woman asked, now sounding irritated. "Yep, that's me," I replied. "You still holding on to that feller? Wins late, ain't he?" I asked, pretending to be a simple hillbilly, just like Dad had taught me to do with tough suspects. "I meant for you to hold on, not, 'Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't do that. I only hold on to womenfolk. Don't think it's right for a man to be holding another feller," I replied, keeping my voice slow and deliberate. There was a pause, and I could hear her take a deep breath. "No, sir. I meant, could you wait a minute while I get Mr. Wingate on the line? Would you mind doing that?" "Oh, you bet. Yes, ma'am, I can surely do that." "How far do you need to go to get him?" I asked, pretending to be interested. "He'll be with you shortly," she said, ignoring my question. I couldn't tell if she was trying not to laugh or holding back frustration, but she definitely sounded more down to earth now. After a longer wait than I expected, Mr. Wingate came on the line. "Good afternoon, Mr. Singletary. I'm George Wingate with the firm of Christopher Stamp and Presley. How are you this afternoon, sir?" "I'm doing mighty fine indeed," I told him. "And how are Christy Bump and Elvis doing?" I thought I heard a woman laugh quietly in the background, but maybe not. "We're all doing well, thank you for asking, Tom. May I call you Tom?" "Well, you can if you want," I replied. "But my real name is Matt, so I don't know why you'd call me Tom. Actually, it's Matthew, but folks call me Matt. My friends do anyhow." "Okay," Mr. Wingate said, "can I please speak to Tom?" "No," I answered firmly. "May I ask why not?" Wingate asked, sounding a bit annoyed. "He ain't here," I replied. Before he could say more, I decided to end the game. My dad gave me the whole ranch, signed it right over, and then took off on a trip with my mom. "Do you want me to give them a message when I hear from them?" "No, that's not necessary. You might be the person we need to talk to. Did your dad give you the land title?" "Yep, he sure did," I said, sensing that Wingate was trying to size me up. "Good, Matt. A team from SunCloud Petroleum was near your land recently. They saw you're selling some of your farm tools, and we were wondering if—" "I'm sorry, but the tractor's already sold to Mr. Jenkins from Whisper Lake, along with the hay baler, disc harrow, and that big plow. But I still have a lot of other stuff you could buy." "No!" Wingate interrupted sharply. "Matt, we wanted to see if we could talk about buying your ranch. That's what you're doing, right? We work for SunCloud and can offer you a good price for your land. We can arrange a round-trip ticket to Oklahoma City so we can discuss this further." "Why would I want to go to Oklahoma City?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Well, that's where SunCloud and our company are, Mr. Singletary." "Oh, wow," I laughed. "You really had me going there. But I can't fly in those airplanes. I get terrible motion sickness. Why don't you and whoever you want just drop by my house whenever it's good for you?" After a long pause, Wingate agreed to visit me the following Thursday. I was sure he thought it would be easier to cheat me in person, but I had already called a lawyer who specialized in selling big properties and land rights. He was ready for this. By mid-June, we had our third meeting with Mr. Wingate and a team from SunCloud Petroleum's law firm. My lawyer, Carl Patterson, was with me, along with more lawyers and helpers on the other end of an internet call. They communicated with Carl through his earbud. I almost introduced Carl as Jed Clampett to Wingate's group, but decided that might be too much. I also held back from calling the pool out back the cement pond, though the thought amused me. The meeting was going well. SunCloud Petroleum had made better offers in previous meetings and calls. The final offer made Carl very happy, and he was ready to wrap up the deal. I pretended to read the papers, though Carl had already approved them. You all agree I can stay here for 181 days after today to sell all the furniture and other stuff, right? Correct, Matt, Wingate said, trying to be patient. You have 6 months plus 1 day. Great, I replied, satisfied. Let's do this, I said, dropping the fake country accent. Wingate didn't notice. I took the pen from one of his young assistants and signed everywhere she indicated. It took a while with all the documents that needed my signature. Sherry Woodward, Wingate's paralegal, was helping me. She was very pretty and probably smarter than her boss. When she first saw the modern appliances, the well-kept house, and the MBA degree on the wall, she looked surprised. None of it matched the clueless hillbilly act I'd been putting on. Sherry stepped away from the kitchen door, glancing at the pool and deck, and seemed like she might whisper something to Wingate. But when he rudely ordered her to fetch something from his SUV, she obeyed without saying a word. She stood close to me afterward, her hip brushing my shoulder as she pointed out where to sign. Up close, she was even more attractive, with a nice figure and a pleasant scent. I didn't mind her being so close. When I finished signing, I looked up and winked at her. She hid a grin behind a fake cough, trying not to laugh. Once everything was signed, I handed my copy of the papers to my lawyer and waited. We had agreed that Wingate's group would transfer the money to my bank right after the signing. Normally this wouldn't happen, but they thought I didn't know much about business. My bank was ready, and I quickly moved the money to another account, then closed the original one. Maybe I was a bit paranoid, but you can never be too careful. Well, it's been interesting doing business with you, Mr. Wingate, I said, shaking his hand. And just so you know, not everyone with a Texas accent is dumb. It's just a way of talking. I saw him start to understand. And by the way, I added with a smile, I would have sold the property for half the price if you hadn't been so arrogant. They all laughed as they got into their big black SUVs, some trying not to smile. After Wingate's door closed, one guy couldn't hold back his grin. Sherry lingered for a moment. I whispered an invitation for dinner and she nodded, handing me a slip of paper with her phone number and hotel name. That evening, Sherry and I had a great time. We went to the best restaurant in town, followed by a nightclub with all kinds of music, including slow dancing. We enjoyed ourselves thoroughly, and when we got back to my place, we talked about Wingate well into the night, continuing over breakfast the next morning. As I reflected on what to do next, I knew flying would be a part of it. I took refresher courses to get my pilot's certificate back, including ground school and flying with an instructor. My Uncle Jake, who had taught me to fly, had passed away 6 years ago, leaving everything to my mom, including 5 small planes stored behind the north barn. I hired 3 aircraft mechanics to fix them up so they could be certified as airworthy. It didn't take long, and I paid the mechanics well. All 5 planes passed inspection easily. I started selling them to dealers, except for one I sold to a private pilot who reminded me of myself. I didn't make much money, but I didn't need to. Finally, only 1 plane was left, and I wasn't even trying to sell it. Flying Uncle Jake's old plane made me feel free. One late August day, I found myself sitting at a picnic table under a big pecan tree next to an old, run-down building with a small sign that said Jesse's. The locals all knew it as the place with the best barbecue around, a hidden gem known only to a few city folks. It was just before noon, and despite the Texas heat, it was pleasant under the shade with a gentle breeze blowing. A light scent of smoke wafted from the barbecue smokers out back, making everyone hungry. Despite its shabby appearance, the place was clean inside and out. I frequented Jesse's often, especially since it was on the route between the city and my parents' old place, which was now mine. Today, though, I wasn't going anywhere. I just wanted some good Texas brisket. I flew over in an old Cessna 172 and landed in a grassy area next to Jesse's. I sat at one of the picnic tables outside, savoring a big brisket sandwich dripping with barbecue sauce, along with some Baracco beans and mustard potato salad. As I ate, I contemplated getting a slice of Jesse's pecan pie, convincing myself that all my hard work justified the extra calories. I wasn't paying much attention to the cars pulling into the lot or the voices around me until I overheard a conversation from a nearby table. "You're going to just sit down with that cowboy?" one voice asked, catching my attention. I was wearing cargo shorts, an old shirt, hiking boots, and a cream-colored Stetson, pretty typical attire in Texas. "He's my ex-husband," another voice replied sharply. I knew that voice. I looked up and saw Faye, my ex-wife, walking toward me. My first thought was, asterisk? Oh no, what does she want? She stopped a couple of feet from my table. "I know you probably hate me," she said, "but could I sit down and talk for a minute?" I put down my sandwich and removed my sunglasses so she could see my eyes. "I don't hate you, Faye," I said softly. Her friends were close enough to overhear, but this was private. "I hate some things you've done, but hating you is too much work. So, no, I don't hate you." I motioned to the seat across from me. "Please sit." "Well, I wouldn't blame you if you did," she sighed, sitting down and getting comfortable. "I really lost my way for a while." I didn't say anything. She already knew how I felt. After a brief silence, she took off her sunglasses and looked at me with her green eyes. "How have you been, Matt?" she asked. "Doing pretty good, thanks," I replied lightly. "And you?" "I'm good. I'm going to night school. Dad said he told you I'll be starting next semester at UT. I'm going to be a physician's assistant." "That's great," I replied, though I honestly didn't care. It wasn't my job to support her anymore. "Matt, with everything that happened, I never got to say I'm sorry. I really am. I wouldn't blame you if you hated me, but I hope you can forgive me someday." "I don't hate you, Faye," I said, cutting her off, "and I've already forgiven you. I don't have the time or energy to hate you. It would destroy me, and life's too short for that." "Okay, thank you," she replied, moving closer to me on the bench. "I'm seeing a counselor," she said quietly. I nodded. "I think we're making progress. She's helped me realize that my choices affect more people than just me." I nodded again. If I had known how bad things would get, I would never have done what I did. "Matt, I'm truly sorry for hurting you." I frowned and shifted uncomfortably on the bench, which she noticed. "What?" she asked, sounding a bit annoyed. "I'm trying to show you I'm sorry and that I'm working on being better." "Faye, I think your counselor is wasting your time and probably your dad's money too," I said. "If all she's teaching you is to avoid mistakes because of the consequences, that's just the first step. There's more to it." I took a deep breath. "To me, saying you wouldn't do something because the punishment is too harsh means you're still thinking about not getting caught." Her face fell, clearly unhappy that I was questioning if she had really changed. "Faye," I said gently, "saying you won't do something just because of the risk of getting punished means you're still tempted. You might think someday that the consequences won't be too bad or that no one will notice, and you might do it again." She took a deep breath, irritated but maybe listening. "There are temptations every day for everyone," I continued. "We're all human and imperfect. But if your first instinct isn't to do the right thing without thinking about it, then it could lead to trouble again." She stared at me, upset and ready to argue. "Well, I guess I'm not as perfect as you," she snapped, then tried to calm herself. "I loved you, Matt," she said, changing the subject. "Whether you believe me or not, I really did love you," Faye said. "I proved it by never cheating on you," I shot back, matching her anger. She winced and looked away. "But telling everyone, do you call that love?" I snorted. "Isn't that like blaming the messenger? All I did was tell the truth about what you and those guys were up to. It was like turning over a rock and watching the bugs scatter." I felt my anger rising and took a deep breath to calm down, relaxing my jaw and slumping my shoulders. "And as for how it all happened," I continued more calmly, "I just did what you did." She frowned, confused. "Remember, Faye, you cheated because you could and because it was fun. Well, that's what I did too. Do you know how hard it's been for me since you told everyone?" She started to defend herself. "That wasn't my concern," I cut her off. "You didn't care about my feelings when you hurt me." She hung her head, staying silent. I was done talking. This was painful and pointless. I put my sunglasses back on, stood up, and prepared to leave. "Faye, I probably shouldn't have brought all that up. It's just what was on my mind. Maybe your counselor would have gotten there eventually. I hope I haven't messed up her plan. I need to get going. Enjoy your lunch." I took a step back from the picnic table, then stopped and looked at her again. And Faye, I did love you so much, but you hurt me deeply in one afternoon. There's nothing left now. All I have is the memory of loving you. I'm sorry, but that's all there is. Goodbye, Faye. I turned and walked toward the gate leading out to the open grassland and my Cessna plane. I tossed the rest of my food into a trash barrel on the way, no longer hungry, not even for that piece of pecan pie I'd been craving. I knew I'd regret not eating it later, but I'd had enough of my ex-wife for now and forever. I needed to be somewhere she wasn't. I had decided a long time ago to fly from the ranch to Jesse's place to avoid the long, winding Texas roads. I'd tried to find the owner of the land on the other side of the barbed wire fence at Jesse's to ask for permission to land my plane there, but I never found her. According to the county tax records, a woman owned the land. So I just started using the open field as my landing spot, figuring I'd deal with any complaints later. Jesse's was separated from the prairie by a barbed wire fence with a 15-foot gate about 30 yards from the main entrance. The gate had probably been used for loading or unloading cattle years ago. It was made of galvanized steel, and while the steel didn't rust, the hinges and latch had. When I first thought about flying to Jesse's, I checked out the gate, saw the issues, and bought new parts. I spent almost a whole day fixing it myself. Now it was a nice wide gate with smooth hinges and a solid latch. As I approached the gate, I noticed a woman leaning on it, her hands resting on the top bar. She had the most amazing, thick, shiny black hair I'd ever seen, reaching down to her lower back and sparkling in the sun. It looked so soft and nice that I suddenly wanted to run my hands through it. She was about average height, maybe 5'6", and slim with well-shaped legs and small feet. Her backside was just right too, and I felt a smile spreading across my face. The annoying conversation with my ex-wife was already fading from my mind. I stopped a few feet to her left, not wanting to come up behind her and seem pushy. "It's a Cessna." I started to tell her more about the plane, but she cut me off. "It's a small plane," the pretty woman said matter-of-factly, turning to face me. She pushed her sunglasses down and looked at me over the top. Her sparkling blue eyes seemed to laugh at me. "It is," I replied, grinning at her. "It just has a front and back seat and can't fly as fast as race cars, but it flies in a straight line and gets places faster than a race car." I usually didn't babble, but this beautiful woman had me doing just that. I couldn't stop smiling. She looked just as good facing me as she did from behind when she was looking out over the prairie. I tried to keep my eyes on hers, but I noticed her firm, nicely shaped breasts. They weren't very big, but they looked great, and she wasn't wearing a very thick top. With her black hair and light brown skin, I thought she might be Mexican, but her blue eyes suggested a mix of other ancestry. I wanted to know more about her. I noticed she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. We chatted about the plane, the sky, the barbecue, anything that came up. I was proud of myself for keeping the conversation going without saying anything too dumb. "You're a pilot?" she asked. "I am," I replied. "You don't look like a pilot," she said, giving me a once-over. "My pilot suit is at the cleaners," I joked with a small smile, "along with my Superman suit and Batman cape." She laughed lightly and playfully hit my arm. We had moved closer over the last few moments, though I wasn't sure who initiated it. When she touched my arm, it felt like a jolt of energy, and I wanted more. "I really am a pilot," I said. "I just flew down from the ranch to get some of Jesse's barbecue. I've been dreaming about it for the last 3 nights." "It is good," she agreed with a nod. "So, want to go for a ride?" I asked, smiling. "A ride?" she echoed. "You want me to go in your little plane?" she asked sweetly, as if she had been waiting for this and maybe had even thought about it for a while. Maybe we were thinking the same thing. I knew I wanted to get to know her better. "Sure," I answered. "I have a Mustang at the ranch. We can be there in 20 minutes by plane. I'd love to see you riding it with your beautiful hair flying in the wind," I said, truly meaning it. I could picture it clearly. She looked at me, then turned and called out to her friend, "Julie!" She had a strong voice. Julie, a short girl with dark hair, heard her and came over. "Throw me my stuff! I'm going on a plane ride!" she shouted. Julie seemed to understand, tossing a leather purse through the air, which landed close to her. I was impressed by Julie's good arm. She picked up the purse, walked back to me and pulled out her phone. After tapping a few icons, she put it to her ear. "Stevie, it's Mercy. Hey, I'm going on a plane ride with Cowboy. Yeah, a plane ride, and we're going to see his ranch and stuff." So her name was Mercy. I hadn't known that, and I wondered who Stevie was. "Yeah, I'll be fine," she said, then looked at me. "It'll be fun. Yeah, Cowboy is really nice. No, you don't know him. He's a guest." Someone on the other end was worried about her going off with me. I stepped closer and smiled, liking the proximity. She smelled nice. I took out my wallet, pulled out my pilot's license, and held it up for her to see. "Yes, I know. Hold on, I do know that. Yes, Stephanie, stop talking, please," she said, rolling her eyes at me as she waited. She took off her sunglasses to read the card, revealing beautiful blue eyes, a cute nose with freckles, high cheekbones, and nice lips. Without her shades, I could see her face more clearly as she talked to her friend. "Okay, his name is Matthew James Singletary," she read aloud. "His private pilot certificate number is 555555555, she continued, not missing a beat. I liked that she was smart and quick. "Yeah, that's it. If something happens and the cops need to find Cowboy, that's how they'll know, because he's wearing a big cowboy hat," she added with a smile. The person on the other end seemed to calm down. "No, I don't know yet," Mercy said quietly. "I'll call you later, okay?" She closed her eyes and bit her lip while listening. "Okay, I'll be careful. Love you too. Bye." She hung up and put her phone away. I led her through the gate, glancing back at the picnic table where I had been earlier. The person I talked to was gone, and I didn't look too long. I wanted to keep them out of my mind for now. "Mercy, do you always talk to your mom like that?" I asked with a casual grin, opening the gate. "That wasn't my mom," she said quickly. "That was my roommate, Stephanie, but sometimes she acts like my mom." "Well, it shows she cares," I said, closing the gate behind us. "My real mom calls me Mercy sometimes, so now Stephanie does too. It's short for Mercedes," she explained. I thought about the name as we walked to the old Cessna 172. "Mercedes," I said slowly, enjoying the sound as she got into the passenger seat. "Do you mind if I call you Mercedes instead of Mercy? It's a pretty name, kind of special, and it suits you." I closed the door for her and made sure it was secure. I tried not to look too closely at her to see if she minded me using her full name, but since she didn't say anything, I guessed it was okay. I took the blocks from around the left wheel, put them in the luggage compartment, and closed the door. Then I climbed into my seat, handed her the headset for the passenger side, and set it to intercom only. I started the engine, letting it run for a while as I adjusted my headset and chatted with her to test the intercom. We rolled away from the barbed wire fence on the plane's big tires, turning into the wind and accelerating across the prairie. We were airborne quickly, one of the reasons I loved the Cessna. I turned in a wide climbing circle to the right, soon flying over Jesse's restaurant and the group Mercedes and Faye had come with. Mercedes waved wildly at them from the right-hand seat. I tightened the circle so they could see her better and wave back. After a loop around them, I straightened the plane and flew south for a minute before circling back over Jesse's, tilting the wings a few times as a goodbye. Then I started a slow climb, setting our course for the ranch my parents had left me. We'd be there in about 20 minutes. As we flew, I leveled the plane at a height that avoided bird strikes but kept us low enough to stay off radar. "If you don't mind me saying, Miss Mercedes," I began slowly, "you're the first Latina I've met with blue eyes. No offense." She glanced at me, frowning slightly. "Well, first of all, I'm not Latina or Hispanic," she said. "I'm Cheyenne, Native American, not Hispanic or Latino or anything like that." I studied her face for a moment and smiled. "Okay, Miss Cheyenne, warrior princess. I once read a lot of journals from mountain men from the early 1800s for a school project. I don't remember them mentioning blue-eyed Cheyenne women." I checked the instruments, then looked at the horizon again. "So tell me the truth. There must be some Celtic blood in your Cheyenne background." Mercedes stuck out her tongue but smiled. "Okay," she admitted, grinning widely. "My mother might be Irish on both sides of her family. Satisfied?" "Very," I replied, nodding like a wise man. "So your dad met an Irish girl wandering around in the wilderness? Was this in Cheyenne, Wyoming by any chance?" "Nope, Philadelphia," she said smoothly. "And Mom says it was her doing. She ambushed a poor wandering Cheyenne man and captured him. She felt sorry for him, and now he's all hers. I laughed, imagining the playful arguments between her parents. My parents had similar fun arguments often. I think I'd really enjoy having a coffee and a long chat with your parents. They sound like good people, I told her, patting her left hand lightly before returning mine to the controls. Her hand was soft and well-formed, like she could have been a hand model. Mercedes asked about Faye, mentioning she'd heard Faye say I was her ex. I briefly explained my divorce and some of what we'd talked about at Jesse's. I told her that I had locked away all my memories of the marriage and its end in a corner of my mind and was okay with that. I also assured her that inviting her on the plane ride in front of Faye wasn't meant to be mean. To me, Faye was just another person at the table now. Mercedes explained that Julie was a second cousin on her mom's side, and that Julie had invited her and Stephanie to Texas for a semi-vacation before their dance troupe started preparing for a European tour. Julie, she said, worked with Faye but didn't know her well. I told Mercedes I didn't know Faye well either, and then we dropped the subject. Mercedes asked how I learned to fly, and I told her about my uncle Jake, who taught me the basics and helped me fly solo at 15. Flying had become one of my favorite things to do. From there, we talked about whatever came to mind. My navigation by feel was perfect, and the ranch appeared on the horizon sooner than I wanted. It was the best time I'd had in a while talking to this pretty Cheyenne woman. I aimed the plane at the part of the prairie I used as a runway and explained to Mercedes about downwind legs and upwind legs. We flew the downwind part, turned hard to the right, and then landed the old Cessna smoothly on its tricycle landing gear. I taxied the plane close to the big barn where we kept the tie-downs and wheel chocks, and we secured the plane against any strong winds. This was Texas, after all, and Texas was all about wind blowing across miles and miles of, well, more miles. Mercedes helped out wherever she could. Once we were done, I guided her through the wide walkway beside the barn. From there, we could see the house about 100 yards away. "Okay," she said, looking around and pointing at the house where my Range Rover was parked near the back porch. "Where's this Mustang you were talking about?" "Oh, it's over here," I said, quickly changing direction and heading towards the small group of horses gathered by the corral fence. They watched us eagerly, hoping for a snack. I didn't have any apples, but the horses didn't know that. "There she is," I said, pointing to a 3-year-old sorrel filly, Ginger, who was moving around excitedly. She seemed to know she was the center of attention. "Hey, Ginger," I called out, holding out my hand. Ginger trotted over, nuzzling my palm in search of a treat. "Mercedes, meet Ginger. Ginger, this is Miss Mercedes, Cheyenne warrior and all-around good person," I introduced them. Ginger shook her head and snorted while Mercedes tried to hide her laughter. "What?" I asked, puzzled by her reaction. "I thought you said you had a Mustang," she giggled. "I do," I said, pointing at Ginger. "She was running with a wild herd in Nevada before she was captured a couple of years ago. She's a real Mustang. There aren't many left." Mercedes laughed again. "I thought you meant a Mustang car. You know, vroom vroom." I burst out laughing too. "Not quite. Why did you think I said I'd like to see you riding her fast?" "I thought it was just cowboy talk," she grinned. I matched her smile. She could joke about herself without getting upset, which made her even more attractive. "Nah, but I'd still like to see you riding her with your beautiful hair blowing in the wind." "You do know how to ride, right?" "Yeah," she said with a grin. "Summers with Grandpa, running elk, remember? But I can't ride in these shorts," she added, looking down at them. "I'd get so chafed I wouldn't be able to walk for weeks." I nodded in agreement. Riding in shorts would be painful, and I didn't want her to suffer. I smiled at her playful grin, feeling more drawn to her by the minute. "So, what's your Cheyenne name, if you don't mind me asking?" She gave me a quick look to see if I was serious, and then said, "It's Little Dove that calls at morning." I tilted my head, picturing the meaning of her name. "Very nice. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman," I said sincerely. She seemed to like that, gently patting my chest as she moved closer to me. Being near her felt really nice. After a short break at my parents' old house, we stocked up on water bottles and went exploring. We drove across the land to where I thought our small herd of longhorn cattle might be, near a spring that never dried up. The prairie beyond my ranch seemed endless, and I hadn't found anyone claiming to own that land. It seemed to be under government control. No one stopped us from letting our cattle graze there, so we used it. We found the spring easily, and while Mercedes strolled around, I cleaned up the flow of water a bit. Then we drove a few miles north and west around a hill and found the cattle making their way back to the water. We parked and watched them slowly move along, Mercedes amazed by the wide spread of their horns. To keep the conversation going, I talked about the history of longhorn cattle in the region, including the ancient ruins under the hill we had just passed. She expressed interest in seeing the ruins someday, and I promised to take her. I also mentioned the buffalo, although they were likely in a different area since they didn't get along with the longhorns. As it got late, we walked back to the house, chatting about random things. Nothing too important, just friendly talk. The shadows were long when we returned to the old place. I drove around the house, pointing out the pool and hot tub in the back. Then I took her down a small hill toward the county road to show her the little house where I lived from age 15 until college. I also showed her the overgrown field where I used to walk many times each day when I was young. I told her how I started running across that field for exercise and how it kept me in shape. Back at the main house, I turned off the engine but didn't open my door right away. Mercedes, I don't want to take you back to town. I'm having a great time here with you, but I don't want you to feel like you're stuck here. So if you want, we can go back to town. I can have you home by dinner. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. What do you want to do? She asked. I want to grill some steaks and make a salad for dinner, I told her quickly. Then maybe we can swim in the pool and later look at the stars while listening to the coyotes. Mercedes looked at me for a moment, then slowly smiled. She grabbed her phone from her back pocket. Stevie? She asked. Hi. I'm not coming back tonight, okay? Yeah, I'm staying out here at the ranch, maybe tomorrow or the next day. Yeah, everything's good. I'll call you tomorrow. Bye. She turned back to me, her expression serious. Matt, she said, I need the bathroom. Can we go inside? She asked with a smile that I was starting to love. Of course, I replied quickly, opening my door. Last one inside has to wait, I shouted playfully. She squealed as she tried to open her door, and we both raced up the steps to the porch. She laughed, trying to slow me down. But I was bigger and in a hurry. I won the race to the downstairs bathroom, but just touched the door and ran upstairs to the big bathroom. I was taught ladies first, and I truly believed that, or else my mom would have been mad. I heard the downstairs bathroom door close just as I was unzipping my jeans, realizing how badly I needed to go. Later, I preferred grilling outside, though I could cook on a stove. Mercedes loved veggies, so we shared the work. I lit the charcoal and cooked the steaks while she raided the fridge for vegetables, making a lovely salad with homemade vinaigrette. She brought the salad to the deck, setting up the plates and silverware as I grilled. We bumped into each other occasionally, our hands meeting as we moved around, sharing little touches and smiles. It had been a long time since I had shared simple moments like this with anyone, and I enjoyed it a lot. It seemed like she did too. Mercedes set our plates side by side instead of across from each other, and I liked that. As night fell, we talked quietly, not about anything important, just two people getting to know each other. Despite having known each other for only a few hours, we felt comfortable sharing thoughts, ideas, and the occasional touch on the hand or shoulder. After dinner, we cleared the table and loaded the dishwasher. Then we moved to two lounge chairs on the deck, which I had already pulled close together. She didn't mind. We watched the night sky, guessing the names of stars and constellations, and wondering if a bright moving spot was the space station or a UFO. It didn't really matter. After a while, I placed my hand on hers, feeling the softness of her skin. She didn't pull away. When it got a bit chilly, we went back inside. At the door, Mercedes stopped suddenly and I bumped into her. She turned, and suddenly she was in my arms. We shared a long, comfortable kiss. She pulled back slightly but kept her arms around my neck and her body close to mine. I never do this on a first date, she said, smiling. That's okay. I wouldn't know how to ask for this on a first date, I told her. I hadn't thought of this as a first date. I wasn't sure what this was, but it didn't matter. She smiled and kissed me again. This time, our tongues touched, and we kissed for a long, sweet moment. My hands ran up and down her back, and her breathing quickened. She pulled away slightly and whispered, "Cowboy, honey." I hummed, enjoying the moment. You remember when you showed me around the house this afternoon? Yeah, I answered, kissing her chin and moving to her neck. Think you can find that big bed upstairs again? I didn't answer with words. I knew what she meant. I locked the back door and took her hand. We walked through the living room, turning off lights as we went. I let Mercedes go up the stairs first, watching her move with the grace of poetry in motion, as the song says. When we reached the bedroom, I turned down the covers. Mercedes quickly pulled off her top and shorts. Our clothes ended up on the floor however they fell. We kissed again, deeper this time. The rest of the night was spent sharing kisses, quiet words, and soft laughter as we grew closer. In that moment, everything felt right, as if we were the only two people in the world. Why didn't you do this with your ex-wife? Mercedes asked after a while. I was caught off guard. Excuse me? I replied. I did all this and more whenever I could, I said. She was quiet for a moment, then laughed. She must have been really foolish. Just so you know, I said, I'm really interested in you, woman. She thought about that for a moment. Well, you do have your moments, cowboy, she whispered. You're finally getting it right. I started tickling her, which led to a playful wrestling match that ended with her on top of me, both of us moving together until we reached another peak of pleasure. When I woke up the next morning, Mercedes's hair was spread across my chest, her head on my shoulder, and her legs wrapped around mine. Earlier, just before dawn, she'd woken me by moving on top of me, and we shared another sweet moment together. As she began to wake up, I kissed her forehead softly. She purred, raising her head for a kiss. Ouch, she complained. What's wrong? I asked. I'm lying on my hair, she explained with a laugh. I got tangled in my hair again. We untangled ourselves and freed her hair from under us. She sat up and gathered her long hair down. Boy, she said, noticing me looking at her, but she was smiling. I need a shower. Badly. Well, just so happens, I replied, so do I. She jumped off the bed, held out her hand, and we hurried to the big bathroom that once belonged to my parents. She wouldn't let me get playful in the shower, saying if we started, we'd be there until dinner, and she was too hungry for that. Later, I earned points by washing her long hair and brushing it out gently. She was very happy by the time I finished. We had a hearty breakfast of bacon, scrambled eggs, toast, and jam. She mentioned being a proud member of the Carnivores Association of North America, which I had never heard of. I believed her because she loved her steak last night and now cleared all the bacon. She finally admitted there was no such group, and I joked we should start one. She sat on my lap and kissed me. Breakfast was a great way to start the day. In one of my t-shirts, Mercedes found her phone and called her friend Stephanie to let her know she was safe. They chatted for a while. I got dressed, took out some trash, and cleaned the horse stable. Afterward, I grabbed a soda from the fridge. Mercedes had finished her call and left her phone on the charger next to mine. Suddenly, it hit me. I got it, I shouted, just figuring something out about jeans, Mercedes, and horses. Mercedes looked puzzled. Mom left a bunch of her stuff here, I said. She and Dad didn't want the ranch anymore and gave it to me to sell. They're traveling in an RV, and anything I didn't want I was supposed to burn. Mercedes nodded. Some of Mom's stuff, like jeans, is still here, I continued. I bet they would fit you well enough for riding. Still interested? She nodded eagerly. We ran upstairs. I showed her Mom's old closet, and she began looking for jeans or slacks that might fit. Meanwhile, I opened my laptop to start a video call with Mom. I wanted to ask if we could borrow the jeans and catch up. Hi, sweetie, Mom said when she answered. How are things going? Pretty good, Mom. Sold Chip and Tatler last week, and I think I have a buyer for the Buffalo. Also sold most of the farm machinery. How about you? I heard some giggling from Mom's closet and saw Mercedes pulling a big box out. I turned back to listen to Mom talk about their travels. After a moment, I told her I had just looked up that Winslow was in an Eagles song called Take It Easy. She was thrilled. I didn't mention I had just done a quick search online. Mercedes caught my eye and held up something. I looked and my jaw dropped. She was holding a pair of fur-lined handcuffs and matching ankle cuffs. I took the handcuffs from her. Mom, I asked, what are these? I held up the cuffs so she could see them on the screen. Darn it, Tom. I thought you cleaned out the closet, Mom said angrily off-screen. Nope. Dad's voice came from the background. You said you were going to get your box of goodies and put it in the RV. Mom turned back to me, looking a bit embarrassed. Well, she said slowly, sometimes moms and dads like to have fun, okay? I had to laugh. Mom, I get it. Now, tell me more about these. She sighed, thinking. Finally, she said, Matt, your dad and I are older, but we still like our fun and games, okay? Mercedes handed me something else from the box. I decided we were done with the conversation for now. I blinked and held the item in front of the camera. What is this, Mom? I asked. Mom took a deep breath. Well, she started, glancing to the side. I figured Dad was nearby. Tom, you should have reminded me about the box, she yelled. No reply came, and she didn't seem to expect one. Sweetie, so on your dad's birthday, sometimes one of my friends comes over and we— Too much information, I interrupted, laughing. There were clearly many things I didn't know about my parents. A memory suddenly came to mind. Oh, like when Aunt Janet stayed the night? I asked. Aunt Janet wasn't really my aunt, just a close friend of Mom's, maybe closer than I had thought. Mom mumbled something, neither confirming nor denying. Wow, I said, still processing. So that time you sent me to my cabin on Dad's birthday, you guys were— Don't be rude, Matthew, Mom warned. I won't, Mom, I promise. But why? Because I believe if your dad gets something, I should get something too, she replied calmly. I stayed quiet, totally shocked. Hi, sweetie, Mom said again, confusing me since she had already greeted me. Is my son treating you right? She asked. Shouldn't you introduce us, Matthew? I was puzzled. Mercedes wasn't in the camera's view and was silent. Son, you know the mirror is behind you, right? Mom asked. I looked back at the old full-length mirror and saw Mercedes reflected in it, looking at something. I sighed, pulling my t-shirt down to cover Mercedes' backside. Things were getting complicated. Mom, meet Mercedes. Mercedes, this is my mom, I said. Mercedes waved at the mirror, then moved next to me so the camera could see her. Hi, Mrs. Singletary, she greeted. Mom chuckled. Call me Leia, like in Star Wars, she joked, smiling. Okay, Leia, Mercedes replied. It's nice how you and your son can talk so openly. They talked, and I tuned out, holding Mercedes' hand under the table. Then Dad's face appeared on the screen, greeting Mercedes before disappearing again. Mom smiled mischievously. Baby, you didn't think only Uncle Jake taught you, did you? She asked. She gasped and hunched forward again. I was shocked. Did Mom know what Uncle Jake had taught me? Sugar, I gotta go, Mom said unsteadily. She glanced at Mercedes and added, Don't do anything we wouldn't do, okay? She was about to end the call. Mom, I shouted. What wouldn't you do? She thought for a moment before answering sweetly, Honey, I'll get back to you on that. She turned off the camera. I closed my laptop and looked at Mercedes, still shocked but not upset. Cowboy, Mercedes said softly. How about we go for a ride? She asked, walking toward the bed with a playful look. I moved quickly toward her. She was on the bed in no time, smiling up at me. We didn't end up horseback riding that day or the next. We finally did on the fourth day, after needing a break throughout the weekend and into the next week. Things were wonderful. Then on Thursday, something changed. Honey, Matt, Mercedes said softly during breakfast. She had been quiet all morning, and I could tell something was wrong. Yes? I asked, ready to hear her out. You know Stephanie, right? I know who you mean, I replied. Mercedes nodded. Could we invite her to stay with us? Would that be okay? I was surprised. Things between us were perfect. We did everything together, farm chores, meals, walks, horseback rides, and just enjoying each other's company. Why did she want to bring someone else here? Mercedes asked if we could have Stephanie stay with us, which felt like an interesting way to put it. Sure, I said calmly. No point in making it difficult if Mercedes didn't want to be alone with me. I'd just go along with it. Mercedes perked up right away. Thanks, honey, I'll call her, okay? You bet. She held my hand and pulled me down next to her while she made the call. She didn't want me to leave, which seemed like a good sign. Hi, Stevie, Mercedes greeted her friend. Cowboy says yes, so it's all set. We can do some routines. Yeah, the living room has hardwood floors. Yes, Stephanie, horses. Yes, the airplane too. Stephanie? Stephanie stopped talking. Mercedes rolled her eyes at me. Okay, yeah, we'll do lots of things. Just pack, Stephanie. Stephanie, shush. Listen to me, woman. Just pack a few things in a bag. No, you won't need much. It's pretty casual here, okay? She mentioned we again, which made me feel good. I waved a hand to catch her attention. Hang on a minute, Steph, Mercedes told her friend. Does she know how to get here? I asked. Mercedes just mentioned bringing things to the ranch. She sighed and shook her head. I smiled. If she can get to McCready Airfield, we can pick her up in the Cessna. What do you think? I asked, giving her the address and directions. She has GPS, Mercedes said, interrupting me. She gave Stephanie the address and looked at me when she asked, how soon can she get there? A couple of hours, Mercedes said after getting an answer. I nodded, checking the clock. Tell her we'll be there at 1 o'clock. Then I remembered something Mercedes told Stephanie. I motioned for her to cover the microphone. Was she worried about what you mentioned? I asked. Mercedes laughed. Not really. Steph is... Well, maybe she likes to show off a bit, Mercedes said with a grin. I had a fun idea. Okay, put her on speaker and I'll tell her, I suggested. Mercedes set the phone on speaker and I leaned closer. Stephanie, I asked. Hey, this is Cowboy. Hi, Cowboy, she replied brightly. Clearly, she wasn't shy. Did you know it's National Flying Day? I said, keeping my voice serious. No? What does that mean? Stephanie asked, confused. I shot a playful glance at Mercedes. It means everyone flying in a small plane today must fly without clothes if they take off between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. Sorry, no exceptions. Mercedes was trying hard not to laugh, her eyes sparkling. Well, Stephanie hesitated. I guess it's okay. Do I need to drive to the airport without clothes too? Oh no, but you'll need to be undressed when you get to the parking lot at McCready, I continued, enjoying the joke. Just wait in the car until you see us taxi up to the side of the field. All right, got it, Stephanie said, still unsure. I chuckled as I made sandwiches in the kitchen, preparing for the day ahead. Mercedes and I did a quick check on the Cessna, and though we put a change of clothes in the luggage compartment, we were both wearing just sandals. Are you sure this is okay? Mercedes asked again, a bit nervous. Honey, we're not going to get stopped by the sky cops, I teased, grinning at her. McCready was a small, quiet airfield, perfect for our little prank. We flew over the parking lot just before 1 o'clock, and there was Stephanie, stepping out of her green car wearing only sandals. She walked confidently toward the grassy airstrip, carrying 2 small bags. Is that Stephanie? I asked, and Mercedes nodded, laughing. I landed the Cessna, taxied closer, and signaled for Stephanie to walk around to Mercedes's side. Moments later, Mercedes was out of the plane, handing me the bags as Stephanie climbed into the back seat, still smiling. Mercedes hopped into the front seat next to me, and we all shared mischievous grins. Just as we were taking off, a voice crackled on the radio. Victor Papa Romeo 319er, this is Jean. I motioned for Mercedes and Stephanie to put on their headsets. 319er, request you return for passenger check-in, Jean continued, trying not to laugh. I chuckled. Negative, McCready, we're off for an important sunbathing session, I joked. Jean burst out laughing. You scoundrel. See you next time, Matt. Woof, woof, I replied, grinning. As we settled into the flight back to the ranch, Mercedes giggled and said, Stephanie, there's no such thing as nude flying day. Stephanie gasped in disbelief and swatted my hand away playfully. You tricked me, she laughed, but she didn't sound upset. Mercedes had mentioned that Stephanie liked to show off, and it seemed true. She was comfortable and confident in the small space of the Cessna, her blonde hair and striking figure drawing attention. We spent the rest of the afternoon giving Stephanie a tour of the ranch. It was clear she enjoyed the adventure, and the playful vibe between us made the day even more fun. Stephanie met Ginger, our dog, and my horse named Horse. We spent the afternoon by the pool, where the 2 women caught up on their lives while including me in their conversation. By the time the sun began to set, we were all comfortable with each other. Mercedes, inching closer to me, would occasionally kiss me, perhaps to make it clear to Stephanie that we were close. When it was time to lock up for the night, Mercedes took both our hands and led us to the bedroom. There hadn't been any explicit discussion about what was next, but it felt like everything had been set in motion from the moment Stephanie joined us on the plane. I followed along without hesitation. As we entered the bedroom, Mercedes whispered in my ear, "Remember, she thinks she's attracted to women." I wasn't entirely sure what that meant, whether Stephanie was certain of her feelings or just exploring them, but I figured I'd find out as things progressed. Mercedes knelt on the bed, pulling both Stephanie and me down beside her. She lay back, glancing between us with a soft, inviting smile. "Please, I want you both," she whispered. There was a brief pause as Stephanie and I exchanged looks. "Stevie, will you help me show Mercedes some love?" I asked softly, hoping the use of her nickname would put her at ease. After a moment of thought, Stephanie nodded and kissed Mercedes, signaling the start of a new chapter in our relationship. We ended the night with a shower, agreeing not to get too distracted since we were all starving. We joked about needing more energy before we changed the sheets and possibly even flipped the mattress over for the next 15 days. The following weeks were a whirlwind of fun and intimacy. The three of us enjoyed each other's company both in and out of bed. They helped with chores and we went horseback riding. I watched Mercedes ride Ginger at full speed, her long hair flowing behind her. We swam in the pool, rode jet skis at the lake, and explored every room of the house in more ways than one. We danced in the city, had fancy dinners, and even packed up their apartment to bring more of their things to the ranch. Those 3 weeks were amazing. 1 week alone with Mercedes and 2 weeks with both her and Stephanie. On the last night, we had planned to be intimate again, but instead, we chose to simply hold each other. Mercedes and Stephanie were leaving the next morning, and the reality of it was hard to bear. "You know why I asked if Stevie could come out here, right?" Mercedes asked quietly. I nodded in the darkness, the moonlight filtering through the window. "If you and I had spent more time alone here, saying goodbye would have been even harder," I replied sadly. "And Stevie needed to figure out her feelings. Looks like things worked out, but I'm not sure if it's what she expected." Mercedes sighed. "I don't know if it worked out for me either," she admitted. "Maybe, just a little. But I didn't expect Stevie to fall for you like I did, or you for her." There was nothing I could say to untangle the complicated emotions we were all feeling. We sat in silence for a while before Mercedes continued. "You know about Stevie and me and dancing, right?" "I do," I said. "You both grew up together, started dancing when you were 4 and have spent your whole lives getting ready for that tour in Philadelphia." "Maybe I could stay here and find," Mercedes began, but I interrupted gently. "No, it wouldn't work. There's nothing like the opportunity you have in Philadelphia. I couldn't take that away from you. It wouldn't be fair, and you'd always wonder what could have been. It would cause problems between us, no matter what we tried." I took a deep breath. "And if I followed you to Philadelphia, you'd be so busy dancing we'd hardly see each other. With all the traveling, we couldn't make it work either." Before we could say more, there was a soft knock on the doorframe. Stevie stood there trying to hold back her tears. "Can I sleep with you guys?" she asked softly. Stevie had intended to give Mercedes and me some space tonight, but being alone with her thoughts was too much to handle. "Sure, honey," I said gently, looking to Mercedes for confirmation. She nodded, and we made space for her in the bed. I invited Stevie to cuddle up next to me, and she gratefully slid under the covers. As I lay on my back, both women rested their heads on my shoulders. We didn't do anything but simply held each other, getting closer than ever before. After Mercedes and Stevie left, I felt completely lost. We had agreed not to call or text each other, knowing it would only make things harder. But the silence hurt more than I expected. I threw myself into the task of selling the ranch. I sold the entire herd of cattle to a ranch near Kingsville, and they planned to mix them with their own herd to add fresh genes. I sold Ginger and another mare to a family, the Ingrams, for just $1 each. Their 2 daughters, Amber and Pamela, fell in love with the horses, and it felt good to see them so happy. The rest of the horses went quickly too, and the buffalo were sold to a rancher in Colorado. All the farm vehicles and equipment were auctioned off in the next county. I gave Uncle Jake's old Cessna 172 to Gene McCready for his pilot training program. When I flew it down to him, Gene and one of his guys flew me back. They couldn't resist teasing me about the time I flew out with 2 naked women in my plane, but I didn't invite them inside when we got back to the ranch. I was tired of being reminded of Mercedes and Stevie. I drained the pool and filled it with rocks and soil to prevent any animals from falling in. I searched the house several times to make sure my mom hadn't left any more surprises. Finally, I got permits for a controlled burn and set fire to the old ranch house and the one I lived in as a teenager. The local volunteer fire department supervised the burn, and we had a big barbecue with ribs, brisket, and sides from Jesse's. The fire crews stayed late, talking and eating until their families called them home. That night, I stayed at a motel, feeling lost without the ranch. The next morning, I started driving to California to meet my parents, who were heading to Yosemite for a short visit. It must have looked odd, a 30-year-old man visiting his parents at a forest campsite, but it felt like the right thing to do. After Yosemite, I drove up Interstate 5, crossed into Canada, and headed for Alaska. In Alaska, I quickly found a job flying small planes for a company based in Anchorage. Frederick Simpson owned 6 otters, and I flew them to remote villages, delivering supplies and transporting small groups of tourists. It was perfect for me. I got to fly a lot and learn about running a small business. Over time, the pain of my past began to fade, though some memories still hurt. I was learning to accept things as they were. Nearly a year after I arrived in Alaska, I turned 31. My dad used to say I was old enough to know better, but young enough to do it anyway. I wasn't sure what it was, but his words seemed fitting. On my birthday, I flew a de Havilland otter to a small village on the north slope of Alaska, taking 9 tourists to see caribou herds, ice-covered coastlines, and oil drilling sites. I couldn't understand why people paid for that, but they did. The village had a single restaurant with questionable food. I was eating a chicken salad sandwich that didn't taste much like chicken, and hoping the onion soup would be better when I heard a voice. "May I sit with you, please? All the other seats are—" I looked up, pleased for the company. It was a young woman I had flown to the village a few days ago. "Sure, Miss Kincaid. Please sit." I stood up as Sharon Kincaid took her seat, happy to have some company for lunch. She was a few years younger than me, probably in her late 20s. Sharon wasn't strikingly beautiful, but she had a quiet charm. She was about 5'5" with a nice figure hidden beneath her loose, cold-weather clothes. Her legs seemed long, which I liked. "Sharon," she said, settling into the hard chair. "Sharon it is," I replied with a smile. "You can call me Matt." "Smart Alec," she teased, glancing at her sandwich with uncertainty. Her slight smile lit up her face, easing some of the tension between us. We chatted about the food, then moved on to other topics. Sharon had warm hazel eyes, the first I'd seen with that color, and her delicate hands caught my attention. After lunch, we had no pressing plans, so we spent the afternoon walking around the site. It was a pleasant day for both of us, and she didn't seem in a hurry to leave my side. It felt good to connect with someone again. The next morning, Sharon and I met for breakfast and spent the day talking and exploring together. I enjoyed getting to know her better. Her eyes sparkled when she spoke, and her smile was genuinely endearing. That evening, the resort hosted a dance in the restaurant. The tables and chairs were moved to the sides, leaving a space in the middle for dancing. A DJ played music on a modest sound system. I arrived late, having spent hours checking the plane for my early flight the next day. When I finally walked in, I saw Sharon sitting alone at a side table. It struck me as odd. Usually, a woman like her wouldn't stay alone for long in a place like this. "Hi, Sharon. Mind if I sit down?" I asked. Her face lit up with a smile, and she waved me toward the empty chair. She looked stunning in a blouse and slacks. Skirts were rare out here, and she wore shoes instead of boots, which highlighted her delicate ankle. I ordered a Diet Coke instead of a beer, needing to keep my mind clear for the next day's flight. Sharon and I spent most of the night dancing, taking breaks only to sit and talk. Thanks to Mercedes and Stephanie, who were pro dancers, I'd learned some basic dance steps during our time together. Sharon and I moved well together on the dance floor, and it felt wonderful to be with her. When the DJ announced the end of the night, I was surprised at how quickly time had passed. Sharon seemed pleased that I didn't want the night to end. We held hands as we walked back to her small cabin. At the door, I took her into my arms naturally, as if we'd done it many times before. She lifted her face and we shared our first kiss, soft and tender. I kissed her again, and she shyly put her arms around my neck, kissing me back with growing eagerness. When we finally pulled away, she looked up at me with concern in her eyes. "You know, they call me the Ice Princess, right?" It was clear she didn't like the nickname. "I didn't know that," I said, holding her close and gazing into her eyes. "But anyone who calls you that doesn't really know you." I kissed her again, this time longer and deeper, but I didn't want to rush her into anything she wasn't ready for. "I have to go, Sharon," I said gently. "I need rest for tomorrow's flight." She nodded, gave me a quick kiss, and released her arms from around my neck. I smiled and walked away, feeling a mix of emotions. As I walked back to my small room near the hangar, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sharon might be watching me, but I didn't turn around to check. I knew I could have convinced her to let me stay, but I liked her too much to risk ruining what we'd started. Almost asleep, I suddenly remembered that I'd called her honey, and she hadn't minded. The next day, we were in the air at 9:18, heading to Fairbanks, about 400 miles away. The plane I was flying had a range of over 550 miles, even when fully loaded. We had 10 people on board, including me. The de Havilland I piloted was set up as a float plane, with wheels under the floats, allowing us to use both runway and water for takeoffs and landings. I hadn't been certified in float planes for long, but Mr. Simpson had to settle for me despite wanting a more experienced pilot. I actually enjoyed landing on water, though it came with its own risks. Sharon Kincaid was in the co-pilot seat for the trip. I invited her as she boarded, hoping she wasn't upset about last night. She wasn't. With a sweet smile, she climbed into the seat smoothly, her bright hazel eyes scanning the cockpit with interest. I couldn't help but wonder how I'd missed noticing how wonderful she looked before. We chatted over the intercom for a while, getting to know each other better, and it felt easy, something I hadn't realized I missed since Mercedes and Stephanie had left. We were flying VFR, visual flight reference, meaning I could see the horizon and maintain a sense of whether we were flying level. Thick clouds hung high above, blocking the sun, and the landscape below looked like the wild Alaskan wilderness I was used to. Around noon, though, I started feeling uneasy. We should have been near Fairbanks by now, but there were no signs of the city. My anxiety grew as we hadn't heard any radio calls or seen other planes, which was odd even with low visibility. "Fairbanks, November Yankee 1905. I called the Fairbanks controller, hoping to make contact. No response. I tried twice more, but still nothing. I moved closer to the controls, checking the instruments. Sharon noticed my worry and placed her hand on my arm. I squeezed her hand in return, appreciating that she didn't ask questions I couldn't answer yet. Another thing to like about her. Then one of the instruments flickered. I leaned closer and tapped the attitude indicator. It spun crazily for a few seconds before settling down. My senses and a glance outside told me we hadn't done a big roll, but the instrument suggested otherwise. I tapped the GPS compass. It spun around wildly, too. Great. Some of my instruments were lying, and I wasn't sure which ones to trust. The engine sounded steady, and the controls responded well, which was a relief. The old mechanical systems weren't reliant on electronics, but still something was definitely off. "Sharon," I said over the intercom, squeezing her hand again. "We're in trouble. Get everyone's attention, please." Without hesitation, she turned in her seat, waved to the passengers, and shouted to get their attention. When some didn't react, she screamed louder, her strong voice cutting through the tension. I pulled back the throttle to ease us into a slow, shallow dive, though the altimeter wasn't working properly to confirm it, slowing down to reduce noise so I could talk to the passengers. "We're in trouble," I shouted, spacing out the words so everyone understood. They all looked at me, the mood in the cabin shifting immediately. "My instruments are dead. I can't tell what direction we're going, if we're climbing or descending or even our speed. We might be lost." Suddenly, we broke through the clouds and sunlight streamed into the cockpit. I turned back to the controls, realizing with a jolt that we were flying straight into the sun. At this time of day, that meant we were heading east, toward a massive mountain range now looming ahead. Without thinking, I banked the plane to the right, aiming southwest, hoping to correct our course and find a way out of this mess. The sun doesn't rise exactly in the east or set exactly in the west, especially here, but seeing it gave me a rough idea of our direction. Changing course, even if it was just an estimate, was better than continuing on our current path. "Okay, we just figured out we've been heading east. "But we should be going south," I yelled to the passengers. "I still don't know where we are, but I've got us heading toward civilization. We're dealing with our problems as we go." Alaska is vast and largely wilderness. I remembered a military plane from Eielson Air Force Base near Fairbanks that had crashed just 7 miles from the runway. No one had ever ventured into that hard-to-reach valley where it went down. And that was close to Alaska's second-largest city. Heading southwest was better than flying east into the cold, desolate wilderness of northern Canada, but it didn't guarantee a safe landing or a comfortable night in Fairbanks. We were running low on fuel, and I needed to land this old de Havilland somewhere before the engine cut out. Controlled landings were much better than crashes. I put my microphone in place and said, "Sharon." She answered quickly, her eyes calm, not scared. "Can you tell the folks in the back what I'm about to say? I need to focus on flying." "Sure," she said. "Go ahead. Tell them we're running out of fuel in about an hour. Make sure they know it's not right now. We still have some time. Ask everyone to look out the windows for a paved runway. If we don't see one, look for a lake with calm water where I can land the plane. Okay?" She didn't answer right away, and I realized I might have been too casual in my tone. But then she shouted to the back, "Matt says we're low on fuel, so we need to find somewhere to land, either a paved runway or a lake. Everyone look for a good spot, okay?" It was a clear and concise version of what I'd said, probably easier for them to understand. I reached out and took her hand, which she held tightly. Despite everything, touching her made me feel a bit more secure. The engine kept running strong as we flew southwest, but I was growing more anxious. The question of where we were had become less pressing than the fact that we were running out of fuel. I had made rough estimates of how far we'd gone off course and how much fuel we had left. The gauge showed we were very low, but with everything else malfunctioning, it might not be accurate either. I knew we'd have to land soon, but I wasn't sure if it would be a controlled landing or a crash. I slowed down the plane, trading speed to save fuel, and we began a gentle descent. Then someone in the back shouted, "There, over there!" I heard him over the engine but couldn't see who it was. "Where's there? Which direction?" I asked quickly. Sharon relayed my question, and the answer came back. "Left, a bit behind us, like at 7 o'clock. "Got it," I replied, turning the plane to the left, careful not to be too sharp given our reduced speed. Soon a small lake appeared in front of us, about 7 or 8 miles away, hidden by mountains until now. "Thank whoever spotted it," I told Sharon, and she passed on the thanks. We flew over the lake, then made a right turn to avoid a mountain. I slowed down again and did a slow pass over the water. It looked good, a mountain lake surrounded by pine or fir trees. The water was clear, and I didn't see any objects that could damage the floats on landing. I made the decision quickly, as I often did. "Okay, Sharon," I said. "Tell them we're landing on that lake. Everyone needs to tighten their seatbelts and brace themselves, okay?" She nodded, and from the corner of my eye, I saw her relay the message. "Okay, everyone," she shouted. "We're landing on the lake below. Please tighten your seatbelts and get ready. Hold on tight. It's going to be a bumpy ride." Despite everything, I couldn't help but smile. Sharon was an amazing woman, and I loved having her with me, even in a plane that wasn't going to be in the air much longer. I glanced at her, still smiling, and gave her hand a quick, gentle pat. She squeezed my hand, kissed the back of it, and then let go so I could focus on the controls. I revved the engine and made a sharp turn, aligning the plane with the long stretch of the lake. I lowered the flaps to 15%, flying just high enough to clear the trees. We were about 35 feet above the forest when I pulled back the throttle and let the plane drop, setting the flaps to 40% to slow us down a bit more. I lowered the nose as we cleared the last tall trees. The glide path was good. We crossed the shoreline at about 20 feet, descending quickly. I lifted the nose one last time to raise the front edges of the floats and cut the throttle. We touched the water gently at first, then more firmly as the plane's weight pushed the floats deeper. I engaged the rudders on the floats, and suddenly it felt more like steering a boat than flying a plane. It was probably the best water landing I'd ever made. We slowed quickly, and I scanned the area for any hazards. Sharon did the same, reporting no issues on her side either. Cheering erupted from the passengers in the back. Sharon turned around, joining in the high-fiving and passing some to me. The relief was palpable. Crashing was no longer a concern as long as I steered clear of any floating debris. I kept the engine idling, cautiously moving forward to survey our surroundings. Finally, I spotted a small inlet on the left, leading to a pebbly beach halfway up the cove. Carefully, we taxied through the narrow waterway, and moments later the floats touched the gravel slope, and we were at rest. I shut off the ignition and turned to Sharon, hugging her tightly and kissing her with pure joy. She kissed me back with equal enthusiasm, but I reluctantly pulled away. There were still tasks to complete. I stepped out onto the left float, retrieved a nylon rope and anchor from the storage bin, and clipped it to a landing gear support. After walking to the front and avoiding the hot engine exhaust pipes, I jumped onto the shore. The pebbles were wet from the water the floats had pushed up, but the ground further inland was dry. I pulled the rope tight and secured the anchor into the pebbly soil, ensuring the plane was stable for now. We'd do a more thorough job later. As I turned back, I saw the passenger hatch open, and a man was climbing down onto the float. "Hey!" I called out. "Everybody come out and get on dry land! Try not to get your shoes wet!" In about 20 minutes, all 9 passengers were on shore, stretching and trying to walk off the cramps. They had their small carry-on bags with them. We could retrieve the rest of the luggage later. While they stretched, I climbed back into the plane to check the fuel level with a dry stick. The fuel barely wet the end of it. "Okay," I called out, gathering everyone's attention. They were already watching me closely. "Is anyone here an ex-Navy SEAL?" A few chuckles from the group. "Army Rangers? Marine Recon?" Some half smiles as they got the joke. "Anyone know MacGyver?" No laughs for that one. A tough crowd. "All right, here's the deal," I said, making eye contact with each person. "The bad news is that my instruments failed, and I don't know when. I have no idea where we are. The plane's batteries are fine, but the radio is broken and I can't fix it. Any electronics experts?" No hands went up. "Okay, anyone have a satellite phone?" Still nothing. This wasn't going to be easy. "Here's the good news," I continued. "We're alive, and no one's hurt. Second, every bush plane has a survival kit in the tail. We've got all the standard gear plus some extras I brought. We have flares, some freeze-dried food, and survival gear like snares and fishing nets. And I've got a .357 revolver and a rifle. We can live off the land and manage fine until we're rescued." They processed what I said, but I didn't tell them the chances of a rescue team finding us were almost zero. We had flown for hours over the empty, cold Arctic landscape, and even after adjusting our course, we still saw nothing but barren land. Anyone searching for us would start by looking along our expected route, maybe a bit on each side. Finding something as small as a person or even an aircraft would be extremely difficult from any height or at any speed. I was certain we were way off the map, truly lost. I decided to give them a couple of days to adjust to the wilderness before breaking the news that we'd likely have to walk out and save ourselves. We stayed busy, setting up 2 strong ropes to help unload the plane and exploring the area. Evening came quickly. One of the guys found a clear area about 50 yards from the water, a perfect spot to set up camp. The old otter plane was fine where it was. At our new campsite, there was a small spring within walking distance that provided very cold water. Downhill from the camp, we dug some holes for our makeshift bathroom. I sent everyone, except Sharon, to gather branches for firewood. Together, Sharon and I cleared a section of the forest floor of pine needles and plants, bringing rocks from the lakeshore to build a fire pit. I had a steel and flint fire starter and some plastic cigarette lighters in my survival gear. I gave everyone a lighter and told them to keep it safe in a zipped pocket. Being able to start a fire easily would be crucial. I used my own lighter to start our first fire. We had 2 small aluminum pots to boil water and enough freeze-dried meals to last several days. As the sun set, darkness fell quickly. There were no lights, no sounds, except for the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of wildlife. We were truly alone in the wilderness. The fire created a comforting circle of light, pushing back the darkness and bringing us closer together. We were no longer just travelers, we were survivors, united by the need to stay alive. As we gathered around, I suggested we introduce ourselves to break the ice. "Okay, how about we all share a little about who we are?" I began, smiling as I tipped my hat. "I'm Matthew Singletary, but please call me Matt. I'm from Texas, been flying since I was a teenager. My uncle taught me, and I came to Alaska to fly these small planes. Used to be a businessman, but I don't miss it at all. The introductions went around the circle. Parker Anderson, a quiet Baptist minister from Omaha, Nebraska, spoke first, followed by his wife, Michelle, who managed everything in Parker's ministry except the sermons, earning a small laugh from the group. April and Ryan Delaney from Waycross, Georgia, shared that Ryan ran a small business in the logging industry, while April worked at an upscale restaurant. Lyle and Penny Martin, both in banking, hailed from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Spencer and Wendy Carlisle owned a successful river rafting business in Colorado. When it was Sharon Kincaid's turn, she introduced herself confidently. "I'm Sharon Kincaid. I live in Anchorage and work for charities. People call me the Ice Princess, but I'm just picky about who I spend time with," she said, flashing a grin but not fully hiding a touch of seriousness. "I think I like everyone here. No idiots in sight." We all chuckled, but I noticed the subtle tension behind her words. After the introductions, I looked up at the sky, pinpointing the North Star. "Let's figure out which way is north," I suggested. Sharon grabbed a long branch and placed it by the fire, and I used another stick to mark east and west on the ground. In the morning, we'd have a rough idea of which direction to head for help. As the evening wore on, I set up my sleeping area near Sharon's tent, laying down branches and leaves for some comfort. Sharon watched me with a hint of amusement. "What are you doing?" she asked, a smile tugging at her lips. "Just making a soft spot to sleep," I replied, thinking nothing of it. "I know that," she said, her tone a mix of exasperation and concern. "But why sleep out here? Come inside the tent, you'll be dry and warm." "I'll be fine," I insisted. "The trees will block most of the rain." "There won't be any rain inside my tent," she stated firmly, her eyes catching the firelight. I could tell she wasn't taking no for an answer. "Yes, dear," I conceded with a grin. Sharon chuckled softly, her smile growing. I gathered my sleeping bag and moved toward her tent, only to have it tossed back out at me. "Hey!" I protested, caught off guard. "We don't need it," she replied, a bit too matter-of-factly. "We'll be warmer sharing body heat." She wasn't wrong, though it wasn't cold enough to justify it for survival. "There's no room for your sleeping bag in here anyway," she added. Peeking inside, I saw she was right. "Yes, dear," I muttered again, this time with a resigned smile. "I heard that," she teased. I crawled into the tent, finding her double-sized sleeping bag taking up most of the space. She handed me her clothes from the day. "Can you hang these on a branch, please?" she asked sweetly. I took them, noticing they were still warm, and draped them over a low branch. Just as I was about to climb back into the tent, she called out, "Matt? Yeah? You should hang your jeans and shirt out there, too. Everything works best if we share body heat. Skin on skin, you know." Her voice was soft, but the implication was clear. We were in this together, in every sense of the word. Knowing some materials work best close to the skin, I wasn't entirely sure about the skin-on-skin idea in a sleeping bag, but it did sound appealing. I took off my jeans and wool shirt, standing briefly in my boxers and socks as the chill set in. Quickly, I slipped inside Sharon's tent, tossing my socks outside before closing the flap. When I turned around, I saw Sharon lying on her back in her underwear. "Shouldn't you keep your—" I started to ask. "Have you ever worn a bra all night long?" she interrupted. "No," I replied softly, unable to help but stare a little. Sharon was beautiful. "Come to bed, Matt," she said calmly. I got into the sleeping bag with her, and she cuddled into me, her warmth against my chest, feeling nice. She made sure the sleeping bag covered us both well. We faced each other, holding one another as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Her arms wrapped around my neck, and we spent a few minutes sharing gentle, warm kisses. Not too intense, but just right. "You know," she murmured softly, "you could have been in my sleeping bag last night if you'd just asked." Wanting to be honest, I said quietly, "I want our first time together to be special, something we both decide on." Sharon looked into my eyes, the moonlight softly illuminating her face. She seemed satisfied with what she saw. She kissed me gently, then settled back into the sleeping bag with a happy sigh. We slept in each other's arms and woke up the same way, sharing more kisses in the morning. As we were going about our tasks the next day, Spence, who preferred to be called Spence, called out to me. "Hey, Matt, what should I do with this big box?" He was at the back of the Otter, rummaging through the plane. At first, I had no idea what he was talking about, but then I saw him lift a heavy box from the last seat in the cabin. I adjusted the pistol on my hip, still getting used to openly carrying a gun in Alaska. "No idea," I called back. "Bring it out here and let's see what it is." When he placed it in front of me, I remembered. The boss had given me a package to deliver to an old friend working at a drilling company in the ANWR oil reserve. But when I tried to contact him from the resort, I found out he'd gone home 3 days before I arrived. I had been planning to take the box back to Anchorage, but now it wouldn't get there. The package turned out to be full of bars of soap and toothpaste. We divided everything and stashed our shares in our backpacks. We spent the second day getting more acquainted with our little slice of wilderness. Reverend Anderson, who insisted we call him Parker, took charge of the fishing nets in my survival gear and caught us enough fish for dinner. In fact, he caught so much that we didn't need to dip into our freeze-dried meals. We were all full and content by nightfall. Sharon and I shared her sleeping bag and tent again that night. None of the married couples seemed to notice or mind that the two single members of the group were getting along quite well. It was a comfortable arrangement for both of us. The third day as survivors started much like the second, but by lunchtime, everyone was getting restless. While we cooked more fish on the fire's hot coals, I finally brought up the topic I'd been avoiding. We weren't going to be rescued. We were too far from any search areas. I suggested that we would have to hike out of the mountains to find civilization. Surprisingly, everyone accepted the situation without much argument. They were smart, practical adults, and our predicament was clear. We began splitting up gear to see what we could carry on the long hike ahead. I had the only large backpack while everyone else had small day packs. As a result, I would be carrying more than my share of the load. My pack's harness was designed to spread the weight, making it relatively comfortable even with 50 or 60 pounds. Just as I was lifting my backpack, I heard a loud scream from the camp behind me. It was a scream of pure terror, unmistakable. I dropped the pack, quickly drawing my .357 revolver. I wasn't the fastest, but I got it out quickly enough. A massive grizzly bear, not a small black bear, but a full-grown grizzly, was standing at the other side of the camp. It was 8 feet tall on its hind legs, weighing maybe 800 or 900 pounds. The bear had wandered into camp between Sharon's tent and the Delaney's bright one. The bear was just strolling through our camp until the scream startled him. Suddenly, he stood straight up, sniffing the air with clear irritation. We were in his territory, and he wasn't happy about it. Everyone on the far side of the campfire scrambled over to our side. The bear didn't like the fire and shied away from it, but in doing so, he put himself on a path straight toward me. I gripped my pistol with both hands, aiming for his head. Anywhere else and the bullets would just bounce off or make him angrier, but even hitting his head was like shooting at armor. He roared, opening his huge mouth, and that gave me an idea. I'd heard of grizzlies being taken down with tiny .22 bullets if they penetrated the brain through the eye. I aimed for the bigger target, his open mouth, hoping a .357 round could do the job. But his head kept moving, even from less than 30 feet away. It was nearly impossible to hit the exact spot I wanted. I emptied all 6 rounds, backing up as I frantically tried to reload from the loose bullets in my pocket. Suddenly, Sharon handed me the rifle from our survival gear and took my empty pistol. Her hand was already in my pocket, searching for more bullets as I turned with the rifle. The Remington 700 was a bolt-action rifle, so I couldn't fire it as fast, but a .300 Magnum round would do serious damage even to a grizzly. The first shot bounced off his skull, the second chipped his forehead. The magazine only held 3 rounds. With no chance of hitting his mouth, I aimed at his chest. The bullet staggered him, but he kept coming. I dropped the empty magazine, knowing I had a spare in my backpack, but doubting I had time to reload. Sharon handed me my revolver back and took the rifle. The bear saw me and turned. I knelt to ensure my shots would go upward, aiming carefully as he moved closer, slower now, but still a threat. The third shot hit just above his mouth, driving into his brain. The bear collapsed, dead, about 12 feet away. An hour later, we decided to leave the campsite. The bear's blood was everywhere, and we knew it would attract other predators. Uneasy, we packed up quickly, strapping tents and gear onto our backpacks, and headed southwest toward a distant peak. We walked until sunset, then stopped to build a fire and boil creek water for our freeze-dried meals. After eating, we extinguished the fire and walked another hour in the dark before stopping for the night. We found a clear hill off our path and set up camp there, gathering enough wood for a large fire. The flames weren't for warmth, they were for light, pushing back the darkness of the wilderness. In the tent, Sharon lay on her sleeping bag, looking tired but relieved. We didn't talk much, just glad to be safe after the day's events. We fell asleep holding each other, comforted by our closeness. Towards dawn, Sharon woke me with a gentle shake, smiling at the morning light. We knew the day ahead would be tough, but we were thankful to have survived the night together. As we finally drifted off to sleep again, Sharon rested her head on my chest. The next morning, Sharon grinned and said, "We'll need to share your sleeping bag tonight so mine can air out." "But mine's only a little bigger than a single," I replied. She just laughed, and I understood. We didn't want to stay apart at night, and her bag definitely needed to dry out. We weren't the only ones. Other couples in camp had also been busy the night before. Despite our fatigue, we were all in good spirits, ready to face another day in the wilderness. We shared a knowing smile as we heated creek water in 2 small aluminum buckets, each holding about a gallon. Mixing the hot water with cool, we washed off from the night before, a routine that quickly became part of our daily survival. The soap we found in the plane's cargo made a big difference, even though it took a couple of hours to clean up. The effort was worth it. Living in such close quarters erased any sense of modesty among us. We quickly adapted to the need for constant vigilance, with someone always standing guard whenever anyone needed to use the facilities. It wasn't something we discussed. It just felt necessary after the bear attack. Changing clothes outside every night became another norm. No one wanted to sleep in sweaty clothes, so we all ended up sleeping nude and dressing in fresh clothes each morning. The tents were too small to change inside, and we had to rinse our dirty clothes in the river. Reverend Parker Anderson, our young theologian, never complained. He and his wife Michelle followed the same routines. Parker stayed positive and was always ready to lift the spirits of anyone feeling down. I asked if I could call him Padre, like a naval chaplain, and he didn't mind. The nickname quickly caught on with everyone. It just fit. The day after the bear attack marked our first full day of hiking. We had put as much distance as we could between us and the bear's body the day before, but our legs and backs ached from the effort. We didn't cover 10 miles that first day, even though we moved for 12 hours. Walking near the river made the journey easier, and we needed that to build our strength. While we were all fairly fit, our daily lives hadn't prepared us for long-distance hiking. It took a couple of weeks for our bodies to adjust to the constant movement, climbing ridges and scrambling over boulders. By 3 weeks in, we had settled into a routine and no longer battled sore muscles. As we progressed, individual strengths began to emerge. Penny Martin, who had been a high school track and field competitor, quickly adapted to hiking and could have outpaced all of us if she wanted to. Her husband, Lyle, an avid fisherman, teamed up with the Padre to catch plenty of fish, ensuring we always had food when near water. Ryan Delaney, a natural cook, took on that role permanently, preparing whatever Lyle and the Padre caught, as well as any game we gathered along the way. We supplemented our meals with berries, wild onions, and other edibles, which Ryan skillfully turned into communal dishes. I became the designated hunter, using the Remington rifle to try to bring down deer, reindeer, or moose for meat. With only 27 bullets left after the bear attack, I was careful to make each shot count. Sharon took on the role of camp guard, often carrying my .357 Magnum as she escorted people to and from the latrine, guarded berry-picking parties, and kept watch over anyone venturing away from camp. Everyone found a way to contribute to our shared goal of survival. A month into our journey, I was leading the group with my rifle, hoping to find a deer or moose for dinner. We planned to smoke any leftover meat for the days ahead, so I was also on the lookout for firewood. Following some animal tracks down a ridge, I spotted 2 big deer licking a rock about 100 yards below. Moving against the wind, I stayed low and crept closer, careful not to spook them. The larger deer raised his head and looked around, causing me to freeze in place. When he took a few steps toward me, I steadied myself behind a small rock and lined up the shot through my rifle scope. I took a deep breath, let some air out, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's crack echoed through the mountains, and the big deer dropped instantly, dead before he hit the ground. The smaller deer bolted, but I didn't waste a bullet on it. We didn't need the extra meat. As I approached the downed deer, I noticed the rock they had been licking was a salt lick. I remembered from a TV show that animals need salt just as we do, but they get it from nature. Using our knives and a hatchet, we shaved off pieces of the salt rock and took big chunks with us. We also saw other minerals in the soil but left those behind. We divided the salt among the group, giving everyone a pound or two to carry. It was heavy, but worth it. Ryan used it to make our meals taste much better. The salt added to our load, but we were grateful for every bit of it. We continued our journey, stronger and more unified in our purpose. We carried the extra weight because it was worth it. As we tried to lighten our loads, Sharon and I made some changes. We slept under just the rainfly of her tent, leaving the tent itself behind, and we shared her double-sized sleeping bag, saving more weight by leaving mine behind. Everyone in the group made similar adjustments, keeping only the essentials: ammo for my 2 guns, a couple of changes of clothes, and the precious salt. Our group had become lean and tight-knit, moving efficiently through the wilderness. One night, as Sharon and I cuddled in the dark, she softly asked, "Do you have something to say to me, Matt? 3 little words, maybe?" She was teasing, but we were growing closer every day. We spent a lot of time talking, sometimes forgetting the others were around, and whispered to each other at night in the sleeping bag. I played along. "Well, I know it's going to rain," I said, glancing outside. "Oh, wait, it is raining." I teased, giving her 3 words, just not the ones she wanted. She elbowed me playfully in the ribs. "Try again," she insisted. I hesitated. I was thinking I could say "I love you," but you might already know that, and maybe you don't want to hear it. She quickly turned to face me. "Say it again," she urged after a quick kiss. "I love you, Sharon Kincaid," I said, meaning every word. This time the kiss was longer, tender, and full of emotion. "I love you," I repeated, savoring the moment. "Why didn't you say that before?" she asked. "Why didn't you?" I countered. She kissed my chest, then tilted her face up for another kiss. "Because the boy has to say it first," she giggled. "Hey, we're in the 21st century. Women can say, 'I love you' first," I pointed out. "Nope," she said, shaking her head. "It has to be the boy." "Well, I said it now," I replied, "and you haven't said it to me at all." She touched my lips with hers and hugged me tightly. "I love you, Matthew James Singletary," she whispered. "I love you so much." We didn't need many more words after that. We showed each other how we felt in ways that were much more meaningful. Later, as we lay together, her legs tangled with mine, I softly said, "I have 4 more words to add after those 3. "What are they?" she asked gently. "Well, let's try this. I love you, and then, will you marry me?" Sharon, tough and strong from our time on the trail, reacted instantly. She jumped on top of me, wrapping her arms around my neck, kissing me while tears of joy streamed down her face. "You could just say yes, you know," I suggested, catching my breath. "Yes, honey," she whispered. "Yes, now and forever." "Would you marry me tomorrow if we could?" I asked. "Yes," she murmured in my ear. I turned my head slightly, not wanting to shout in her ear. "Hey, Padre," I called out. "Yes, Matt?" "Can you marry us without a marriage license?" I asked. He paused for a moment. "Well, I guess so. You'd be married in the eyes of God, but the state of Alaska might think they need a fee for it." "How about marrying us in the morning? I'll pay the fee when we get to town," I said, my voice full of anticipation. "Okay," Padre agreed. "Right after breakfast." "About time," someone chimed in, probably Spence Carlyle. I heard a faint slap, likely from his wife, Wendy, correcting his manners. The next morning, after a breakfast made from the leftover deer, the Padre led a small ceremony. We stood high on a ridge with snow-covered mountains as our backdrop. A truly beautiful place to get married. I gave Sharon a wedding ring I had carved from a small piece of pine with my pocket knife. It wasn't much, just a symbol, but the tears in her eyes told me she appreciated it. And she didn't hit me, which was always a good sign. We continued our journey, heading southwest. Each night, we checked the North Star and picked a course toward a clear landmark. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet we kept moving. It was impossible to tell how many miles we had covered. The terrain forced us to constantly find ways around cliffs, steep slopes, and uncrossable rivers. By mid-August, 3 months after our plane went down, we came to another large river. It was too deep to wade across, so we had to build a raft. We had done it twice before, so we knew what to do. The challenge was finding the right logs, and carrying them was hard work. We needed to find a spot where the forest was close to the water. As I scanned the trees behind us, about to suggest we move to a better location, Sharon suddenly gasped. She hurried around behind me and started rummaging through my backpack. "What are you doing, honey?" I asked, confused by her urgency. She didn't answer. Sharon unzipped the bag, grabbed something, and sprinted toward the river. I turned to see a boat about 50 yards away, its blue and gold colors marking it as part of the Alaska State Troopers. The person steering had likely already spotted us, but I made sure to grab my gun and fire 3 shots into the air to get his attention. Sharon, not taking any chances, had pulled out the flare gun from the backpack and fired it straight across the water. The bright red flare shot towards the boat, catching the trooper's eye. He waved and started turning the boat in our direction, but then noticed the flare was heading straight for him. He ducked at the last second, narrowly avoiding it. "Hey, stop that!" he yelled, once back on his feet. "I see you! Give me a minute to get over there, dang it!" All of us on the riverbank burst out laughing. It was a moment of pure relief. I grabbed Sharon and hugged her tightly, kissing her over and over in joy. The Alaska Wildlife Trooper, whose title I learned later, made a long call to his base using a satellite phone, a mental note to myself to never travel without one again. Officer Adams, with my help, relayed our names and the details of our situation to his commander. Soon after, a big helicopter was dispatched to pick us up and take us back to Fairbanks. As it turned out, even if the trooper hadn't found us, we weren't too far from civilization. A few days' walk across the river would have led us to roads and small towns. That realization felt good. We weren't just survivors, we had saved ourselves. Sharon had mentioned her father had money, but it hadn't seemed important until now. Apparently, he had a lot of it, and his properties were immediately useful. For instance, he owned a fancy hotel just outside Fairbanks. After the state troopers finished taking our statements and verifying the details of the crash, a kind secretary drove us to that hotel. When we walked into the lobby, it was clear how out of place we were. Our clothes were rough, worn, and we smelled terrible. On the trail, it wasn't noticeable, but here in the elegant lobby, we stood out like sore thumbs. We hesitated, unsure how to announce ourselves after being presumed dead for almost 4 months. Sharon quickly solved that problem. She spotted a tall woman in a dark gray business suit stepping out of an elevator, followed by a group of people. "Teresa!" Sharon shouted. "Teresa, over here!" The woman didn't immediately respond, but others in her group turned to look at us. Sharon wasn't having it. "Teresa Cunningham, you pay attention to me now!" she yelled. That did the trick. Teresa's eyes widened in shock when she saw Sharon. She handed her phone to a man behind her, who fumbled to catch it as she let it go and rushed toward us. Sharon met her halfway, and they embraced, both women in tears. I followed more calmly, letting them have their moment. As Sharon tried to explain our 4-month ordeal, her words were choked with emotion. I gently touched her arm and she turned to me, still emotional but smiling. "Honey, Teresa has always been a really good friend," Sharon said, then turned back to Teresa. "Terry, I'd like you to meet my husband. Terry, this is Matt. Matt, Terry." I extended my hand. "Nice to meet you, Miss Cunningham," I said, recalling Sharon had called her that a moment ago. Teresa looked between Sharon and me, clearly struggling to process everything. "Sharon has been... Oh my gosh! When? How? I mean, where did..." Sharon finally took pity on her. "Terry, we have a lot to catch up on, but for now, can you get us a room? We're exhausted and we really need a shower." "Or 2, I added, smiling. Sharon squeezed my hand and added, "Or more." Teresa, still reeling, managed to respond, "Oh God, yes." I wasn't sure if she was reacting to our smell or the request. She quickly turned to the man behind her. "Simon, get Sharon Kincaid. Mr. Kincaid's daughter and her husband into the penthouse, now." Simon, who appeared to be the hotel manager, rushed to the check-in desk, speaking urgently. Moments later, he returned with a key card and escorted us to the VIP elevator, clearly meant for special guests. Simon swiped the card, and the door to the penthouse suite opened. We followed him into the luxurious space, where Sharon and I sank into one of the 3 sofas in the sunken sitting area. Across from us, Teresa Cunningham, or Terry, as Sharon called her, took a seat on another sofa. I felt slightly out of place, having spent the last 4 months sitting on tree stumps or the ground, but I reminded myself that I'd get used to comfort again. "Terry," Sharon began, her tone familiar, indicating they had been close before all of this. "Matt and I tried all our credit cards, but they've been canceled. Matt might have a few 20s that got wet in the river, but that's about it. Can you ask Uncle Carl if we can get a couple of corporate cards until we sort everything out?" She laughed softly, adding, "Oh, and I need to call Mom and Dad to let them know their daughter is back." Teresa blushed slightly. "Of course, honey. I'm sorry, I'm just so shocked I can't think straight." She handed Sharon her cell phone. "It's not locked. Your parents' numbers are in the contacts. Call them while I contact Carl, okay?" Sharon took the phone and started searching for her parents' number, leaving Teresa and me in an awkward silence. Teresa was a striking woman in her early 40s, with dark eyes and a calm demeanor. Her almost shoulder-length black hair framed her face perfectly, giving her an air of confidence and authority. I leaned forward slightly. "Miss Cunningham," I began. "Please, call me Teresa," she interrupted with a smile. "Then I'm Matt, Matthew James Singletary," I said, returning the smile. "I have a request. Sharon and I need some clothes, badly. Could we get a line of credit at the shops downstairs? We promise to pay it back as soon as we can. Right now, we're offending not just ourselves, but everyone we meet." Teresa looked momentarily embarrassed, then quickly walked over to a small table near the door and picked up the house phone. "This is Miss Cunningham," she said when the front desk answered. "Do you know who I am? Good. Can you make things happen without needing Simon Humphrey? Great. Please send Mr. Charles and Miss Reardon up to the penthouse now. Also, send lunch for 3, big portions." She glanced at me for approval. I grinned. "Big portions for 2 hungry meat-eaters and lots to drink, but no plain water. We've had enough of that." She laughed, visibly relaxing, and passed on the instructions before hanging up. Then she dialed another number. "Donna, it's Carl. Yes, break into the meeting. This is really important. Yes, I'll wait." After a few seconds, she continued, "Carl, if you're not sitting down, do it. You're not going to believe this. Sharon Kincaid is alive." Her excitement was palpable. "Yes, really. I'm here in Fairbanks, in the penthouse suite with her and her husband. Yes, husband." She glanced at me, smiling. "I don't know many details right now, but can you arrange a couple of corporate cards for Sharon and her husband, Matt Singletary, until they get their own cards back?" "Yes, Matthew Singletary, great. And have them sent by courier, perfect. Also, can you let Mr. Kincaid know? Thanks. No, that's all for now. Thanks a bunch, Carl. Bye." Meanwhile, Sharon was talking into the phone. "Hi, Mom," she said, then paused. "Mom? Mom?" She frowned, looking at the screen. "Hello?" She looked up at me, puzzled. She answered, then it went quiet. "Hello?" "Yes, Jenny, it's Sharon. Yes, it's me. We just walked out of the mountains after the crash." She rolled her eyes at me playfully, knowing how much I disliked the word crash being used to describe what had happened. I turned back to Teresa. "So, Teresa," I asked, "what do you do for Mr. Kincaid?" "I'm a consultant of sorts," she replied. "I travel to his different businesses and offer management help." I nodded. "Sounds a lot like what I did in my old job. My boss used to call me his paladin, sent out to fix problems and catch the bad guys." "Really?" Teresa seemed amused. "We should exchange stories sometime," she said, laughing. It was clear she was beginning to relax, accepting me as a friend. This was a good sign. I had been wondering how I would fit into Sharon's world, but I also knew Teresa was still reeling from seeing Sharon return from the dead. She hadn't fully regained control of her emotions yet. Sharon could still turn out to be a tough businesswoman, I thought as she shouted into the phone. "Mom! Yeah, it's me. No, I'm fine, Mom. Really, we're here in Fairbanks at Daddy's hotel. Yeah, they're taking good care of us." She started to sound annoyed, but then her tone softened. "Yes, I do have someone I need to introduce you to," she grinned. "When you get here, Mom, you'll like him." They talked a while longer before Sharon hung up, looking relieved. "Mom's going to find a flight up here. She's in Florida, and she's not sure when Dad will get back." "What is Dad doing in Tierra del Fuego, racing?" Sharon asked, confused. "Honey, I don't know," Teresa admitted. "We'll just have to ask him when he gets here," she added. The two women settled into a long conversation, catching up on everything that had happened since Sharon's adventure on the North Slope. I listened for a bit before announcing, "Okay, I don't know about you all, but I need a hot, soapy shower, and I'm not going to resist any longer." I smiled as I stood up. "Ooh, me too," Sharon said happily, jumping up. "Wait for me, hun." She turned to Teresa with a mischievous smile. "My husband and I are going to scrub off a few months of dirt and grime, and it's going to take a while, okay?" She glanced at me before turning back to Teresa. "And if we find anything nice under all those layers, we might take even longer." She winked, leaving Teresa to understand the implication without saying too much. Teresa checked her watch. "I'll have lunch delivered in, how about exactly noon? That'll give you almost 2 hours to wash off all that dirt, maybe even twice." I nodded, giving Teresa a thumbs up before hurrying to catch up to Sharon, who was already heading for the bathroom. We quickly stuffed the clothes we'd never wear again into plastic bags we found in the closet, planning to dispose of them later. A few minutes past noon, Sharon and I emerged from the bathroom in fluffy white robes, feeling refreshed. We found 2 large trays of food and drink waiting by the balcony door. There were also a couple of young interns Teresa had called in, standing by. Sharon and I invited Charles Mallory and Samantha Reardon to join us. Soon, the 5 of us, including Teresa, were digging into thick sandwiches and drinking soda, things Sharon and I had only dreamed about while trekking through the mountains. Charles and Samantha, being interns, probably didn't get many opportunities for a feast like this, so they were thrilled. Teresa had officially made them our personal assistants, and they were already proving to be excellent at the job. They quickly located my parents and got their phone number, which I didn't have memorized. With all the confusion, I was considered dead, along with the rest of our group, and it was a struggle to get that status reversed. When I finally got to talk to my shocked parents, I arranged for them to come up to Anchorage. They just needed to find a place to store their RV before heading out. Without my knowledge, Teresa upgraded their airline tickets to first class. She had taken it upon herself to be our guardian, handling anything that Charles and Samantha couldn't. She bulldozed through the mid-level managers in the Kincaid organization, ensuring we were reinstated in the system. Within a day and a half, all our records were corrected. I had a new phone with all my contacts, and my pilot's license, driver's license, and bank accounts were reactivated. They even arranged for a tailor to visit the suite to take measurements for new clothes. I complained a little, saying I could pay for what we needed, and didn't see the point in tailored jeans and shirts, especially since we were likely to gain weight now that we weren't hiking every day. No one paid much attention to my complaints, but they did so politely. Teresa also arranged for our entire group of survivors to undergo complete physical exams. We spent our second day in civilization at the hospital, getting every part of our bodies checked. By the end of the day, we were declared extremely fit and healthy, something we already knew. That was the last time our group was together. After that, everyone else went home to resume their normal lives. Sharon and I went home together, waiting for our flight in those uncomfortable plastic seats at the airport. Sharon and I sat close, holding hands and talking quietly, our shoulders comfortably touching. We were at Anchorage International Airport, waiting for Sharon's mother to arrive after a challenging journey from Miami. Judith Kincaid had gone to great lengths to get here, even offering $10,000 in tickets anywhere in the world to trade her standby ticket to Seattle. A family from Galveston accepted, choosing Disneyland over Alaska. As we waited, I tried to keep my nerves in check. Sharon whispered that I would love her mom, along with her sisters and brother. When I spotted a tall woman with gray hair descending the escalator, I knew it was her. I gave Sharon a quick kiss to get her attention, and she jumped up, running across the arrival lobby to embrace her mother. I followed more slowly, giving them time to reconnect. As I approached, I could feel Judith's eyes on me over Sharon's shoulder. This was our first meeting, and while Sharon had mentioned me on the phone, it was still a big moment. I gently placed my hand on Sharon's back as she introduced us. "Mom, this is my husband, Matt. Matt, this is my mom, Judith. She likes to be called Judy." "Mrs. Kincaid?" I said, hoping I sounded friendly. "Judy, please," she corrected with a smile, which immediately put me at ease. "I'm going to keep him around, Mom," Sharon teased, pointing at a huge stuffed polar bear in the lobby. "I might need him if I run into another one of those." Judy glanced at the bear, then back at Sharon, relaxing a bit. "I'm guessing there's a story behind that," she said, just as a uniformed driver arrived. "Can we continue this at home?" she added, giving me a kiss on the cheek as we headed out. I silently celebrated this small victory. Mom-in-law was not hostile. Later, we were seated in a spacious family room, sharing the story of our journey with Judy, who was clearly captivated. Sharon and I were on one sofa, and Judy was comfortably perched on another, her feet tucked under her. When I accepted tea instead of coffee, she seemed pleased, and even more so when I requested it in a manly mug instead of a delicate cup. As we recounted the tale, Judy leaned in, intrigued by every detail. "So, Matt is the knight in shining armor who saved you from the dragon?" she asked, a playful glint in her eye. Sharon held my arm tightly, smiling. "He is my knight in shining armor, and he did save me," she said happily. I couldn't let Sharon take all the credit. "Judy, your daughter was right there with me when that bear charged. I was shooting with my revolver, and Sharon found the rifle and brought it to me, walking straight at the bear. She reloaded my pistol while I used the rifle, and when that was empty, she handed the revolver back, ready to go. She stood her ground, aiming the rifle until the bear went down. If I'm a knight, then Sharon is a warrior princess." Sharon turned my face toward hers, giving me a long, loving kiss before turning back to her mother. "My husband," she said with a contented smile, patting my leg warmly. We talked for hours, sharing stories of the mountains we climbed, the rivers we crossed, and the morning we got married as nature woke up around us. Judy wiped tears from her eyes as she listened, eventually coming over to hug Sharon tightly. Both of them had a good cry together. "Thank you, son," Judy said softly after a while, hugging me as well. "Thank you for bringing my daughter home." "Matt, we kind of brought each other home," I said, my voice rough with emotion. Judy patted my hand and smiled. "I can see that. You two are a team, and it's obvious how much you love each other. No one could ever doubt that." Sharon's tears started to flow again, and seeing her cry brought Judy to tears as well. I felt my own tears welling up, and I couldn't help but protest. "Well, hell, if you tell anyone about me crying like this, you'll ruin my tough guy reputation, you know?" Sharon and Judy both laughed through their tears, and we all embraced again, the mood lightening. Judy then warned with a grin, "I hope you know that everyone I know is going to hear about your trip, the bear, and how you two love each other. The whole state will know before I'm done talking." I started to say something. "Judy, But Sharon interrupted with a beautiful smile. "Mom." I tried again. "Oh, Mom." And then stopped, realizing I'd lost my train of thought. They both looked at me, waiting. I shrugged. I have no idea what I was going to say. They laughed at me, reminding me that I was only human after all. The next day my parents arrived, and Mr. Kincaid was due soon after. We met my parents at the airport and brought them back to the Kincaid home. We settled them into one of the guest rooms, while Sharon and I stayed in her old bedroom. For about an hour, we got comfortable with each other, sharing stories. Judy couldn't wait to tell the bear story, and had everyone laughing. I had to interrupt a few times when she stretched the truth, but she told it better than either Sharon or I could, so we let her carry on. Judy and my mom, Leah, hit it off immediately, and Sharon quickly charmed my dad. Then Bruce Kincaid entered the room. It felt like there should have been trumpets and a 21-gun salute. He sent his assistants away, took off his coat, and looked directly at me. After shaking my hand, he did the same with my parents before giving Sharon a tight hug. Only then did he smile, and I was relieved to see he truly loved his daughter. But I knew what was coming next. A private talk in his study. Sharon and I had discussed this moment beforehand. I was a bit rattled by how confident he was that he knew best for his daughter, assuming a cowboy bush pilot wasn't the right choice. After a brief conversation, I returned to the main room and sat beside Sharon, smiling at her. She smiled back brightly. I nodded, signaling that things had gone just as she predicted. "So how'd it go?" Sharon asked loudly. "He offered me $250,000 to leave Anchorage and never return," I said plainly. Kincaid looked surprised. I wasn't supposed to say that. "Daddy!" Sharon exclaimed, feigning outrage. "You only offered him that much? I'm hurt. Are you hurt?" she asked me. "I am," I replied seriously. "Daddy, how could you? $250,000? Don't you love me? I'm worth a lot more than that. You should offer Matt at least $10 million. Maybe $20 million. What were you thinking?" Sharon teased, her tone sharp but playful. Kincaid was momentarily speechless, realizing Sharon had orchestrated the whole scene. He finally gave in, acknowledging he was outmaneuvered. "Welcome to the family, Matt," he said, raising his glass. "And good luck." Sharon sat beside me and I kissed her on the lips. She looked at me confused. We had an understanding. Whenever Sharon held back a smart remark or stopped herself from reacting, I'd kiss her. But this time, she had just yelled at her father. "You were pushed too far and you didn't hurt anyone," I whispered. Then I kissed her twice more. We smiled at each other, relieved. Suddenly, Sharon turned to her father. "Besides, Dad, you'll want Matt here with me and your new grandchild." The room fell silent for a moment. I turned to her, amazed. "You mean you're—" She nodded, smiling calmly. "We got the test results back from our exams this morning, remember?" I nodded, still in shock. "Well, mine had a couple of extra pages." "I'm 3 weeks pregnant," Sharon said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Oh my God," I breathed, pulling her into a tight embrace, kissing her repeatedly. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, still in shock. "I kept it to myself, just in case," she murmured back. "In case Dad was worse than usual," she added with a small smile. I kissed her again, unable to stop. "Nothing but kisses for you today," I told her. "You defended me, our marriage, and now you're having our baby. You can't do anything wrong today, love." Sharon was soon swept away by our mothers, who hugged, kissed, and congratulated her. I got handshakes and pats on the back from my dad and Bruce Kincaid, but no kisses from them. When the grandmothers-to-be were done with Sharon, I pulled her close again, kissing her tenderly. She hugged me back and kissed me too. Judy sat on the arm of Bruce's chair, watching us with a thoughtful expression. "Do they remind you of anyone? You and me, maybe?" she asked her husband. Bruce looked at us for a moment, then shrugged. "No, can't say they do," he replied, earning an elbow to the ribs from Judy. He winced dramatically, and I laughed loudly. "That's where she gets it," I said, grinning as everyone looked at me, puzzled. "I always get elbowed in the ribs or pinched or something. Now I see she gets it from her mother." The room filled with laughter, the tension easing after a rocky start. I turned to Bruce, still smiling. "Just asking for advice, Bruce. Any chance a little spanking would help with that habit of using elbows to communicate?" He thought about it for a moment before replying, "I'll have to get back to you on that," taking the easy way out. Judy gave him another playful elbow, but he grinned broadly. I was starting to like my new father-in-law, and I thought he was starting to like me too. As my dad returned from looking out the balcony door, I called out to him, "Hey, Dad, do you think a spanking would work with Mom? Help with some of her little pats and pinches?" He raised his eyebrows as he sat down, tightening his lips but not replying. My mom, who had been admiring a painting, patted me on the arm as she passed. "Wouldn't work at all, honey," she said quietly. "I like it too much," she added with a sly smile, sitting demurely beside Dad. Judy burst into loud laughter, trying and failing to cover her mouth with both hands. "She likes it too much," she wailed, falling onto Bruce and trying to stuff his shirt into her mouth. My eyes widened as I looked at Sharon. "Don't even think about it," she advised with a look, leaning close to whisper in my ear. "I'm pregnant right now, you know," she added, her eyes sparkling. Our marriage in the woods was real, but it wasn't legal in Alaska or any other state. To fix that, we had a civil ceremony with a marriage license a week later. Sharon and I didn't want a big, flashy ceremony, but we couldn't fully avoid it. So a month after the civil ceremony, we stood before the preacher at the Kincaid's church and exchanged the same vows we'd shared in the wilderness. Mother Kincaid only invited 216 guests. Sharon's dad gave us a wedding gift, a travel pass for endless flights with one of the world's biggest airlines. We used it a lot, choosing warm places where we didn't need heavy clothes or boots, and where hotels had plenty of hot water for showers, baths, and jacuzzis. After months of tough travel, we wanted to relax and enjoy ourselves. Thomas Bruce Singletary was born just under 8.5 months after we found out he was on the way. His sister, Judith Leah, followed 14 months later. They both had me wrapped around their tiny fingers from the start, and they knew it. We decided to wait before having more kids, so our first two could grow a bit older. I was sure Sharon loved me deeply, and I thought we were very happy together. We were, until I learned that nothing between a man and a woman is perfect forever. Sharon was dying. She had been getting worse for almost a year. The cancer was aggressive, eating her up from the inside. She held on for nearly 4 months, longer than the doctors had expected. But when I brought her back to the hospital this time, we both knew she wouldn't be coming home. Her breaths were short and labored, and the morphine wasn't enough to ease her pain anymore. She was suffering, but still trying to stay alive a little longer for me and our 2 kids. I got up from the uncomfortable chair the hospital provided and leaned over my wife, kissing her lips softly. I wasn't sure if she could still feel it, but maybe her breathing slowed for a moment before returning to those rough, weak gasps. I leaned in closer and whispered in Sharon's ear, "Honey, I'll always love you. Tommy and Judy know you love them, and they'll always love you too. You don't have to fight anymore. It's time to rest. I'll take care of the kids and they'll take care of me. Don't worry, we'll be okay." I kissed her forehead, then her lips, and gently stroked her weak arms and face. A few moments later, Sharon exhaled softly and didn't breathe in again. The machine's wailing confirmed what I already knew. Sharon was gone. I straightened up, kissed her one last time, and stepped away from the bed, allowing the doctor and nurses to come in. Biting my lip, I turned to face Sharon's parents. I hugged Judy, then Bruce, before stepping aside to give them time to say their goodbyes. Through my tears, I searched for the door, knowing I had to find my son and daughter. I needed to figure out how to tell a 3-year-old girl and her 4-year-old brother that their mom would never hold them again, that she was with the angels now, watching over them forever. In my grief, I tried my best to be both dad and mom to my kids, helping them through their sadness while dealing with my own. Anchorage and Alaska became unbearable, filled with too many memories of Sharon. Despite my good relationship with my in-laws, the constant reminders of what I'd lost were too much. Like a wounded animal searching for safety, I took my children back to Texas, where the memories wouldn't haunt us every day. Bruce and Judy weren't happy with my decision, but they understood. They could visit us in Texas any time, thanks to their wealth. A trust fund set up by Sharon's great-aunt matured after Tommy was born, and when Sharon passed, the money came to me. Although I didn't want it and tried to give it back, my in-laws wouldn't take it. Overnight, I became a millionaire. I set up trusts for Tommy and Judy for their future, and the rest of the money stayed in the bank, growing quietly. My parents, who had been traveling the country in their RV, decided to settle down. They welcomed us with open arms, selling their small house in the city and moving to a bigger one with 4 bedrooms, hinting that they wanted Tommy and Judy to visit often. My parents were happier than I'd ever seen them, spoiling their grandchildren as grandparents do. At 36, I didn't worry about getting older. My focus was on raising my kids. Tommy was 5, and Judy was almost 4. The months after Sharon passed were tough. Her illness had felt like a prolonged period of grieving, even before she died. The kids didn't understand much, but they knew their mom wasn't in pain anymore, which brought some comfort, even if it didn't make up for losing her. I owned a business. Well, I was a partner in one. Sharon's friend, Teresa Cunningham, and I shared a similar business background. I managed to convince her to join me instead of working for my father-in-law. Together, we formed a consulting firm, analyzing businesses and writing reports for owners and boards of directors, highlighting weak spots. Teresa handled most of the day-to-day tasks, only calling me in for major decisions. Most of our startup money came from the trust fund Sharon left me, and I owned 51% of the company. Teresa and her husband Carl owned the other 49%. Eventually, I'd make it easier for them to buy me out. I wanted to spend more time raising my kids. One bright, sunny Texas day, Tommy and Judy convinced me to take them to a place they loved for its pizza. The pizza wasn't great, but the place had lots of little games and rides for kids. Even at almost 4, Judy knew how to insert a game token and would giggle with joy during the game's startup before she even began playing. Tommy was right there with her, and they both seemed to intuitively understand how the games worked. Watching them have fun was all that mattered. I sat in a booth, watching my kids a few feet away on a small merry-go-round that turned slowly, feeling grateful for these simple moments of joy amidst the lingering sadness. I would have been bored, but the kids seemed to enjoy it. I helped them onto the ride and then sat back down, keeping a watchful eye on them. Of course, I carried my Glock 38 with me, always ready to protect my children. I glanced around at the other parents, who looked just as bored as I was, waiting for a special pizza I ordered, hoping it would taste better than the buffet offerings. The kids would likely choose the buffet, but watching their happy faces made me smile. We were learning to live without Sharon, though her memory was always with us. It had been almost a year since she passed. "Hey, cowboy," a woman's voice said. "Got room for a couple of girls?" I wore a Stetson outdoors, so the cowboy comment wasn't unusual, but the voice, it was familiar. I turned quickly to see a beautiful woman standing beside me with a little girl. My heart skipped a beat. "Mercedes?" I whispered in disbelief as I stood up. Facing me was the lovely woman with dark hair and bright blue eyes I hadn't seen in years. She smiled shyly at first, then more confidently. I hesitated, unsure whether to hug her. I remembered reading she got married years ago. True, I'd also heard she was getting a divorce, but I didn't know if that was true. "Hi, Matt," she said softly and stepped forward, kissing me gently on the lips. That cleared up my hesitation. I almost hugged her, but settled for holding her elbows and bringing her close for another kiss. I wasn't going to get involved with a married woman, and she knew that. But her actions didn't suggest she was still married. Then I felt a tug on my jeans. I stepped back a little from Mercedes and looked down to see the cutest little girl, except for my own Judy. I couldn't help but smile at her, and she smiled back. "Are you my mommy's friend?" she asked in a sweet voice. I squatted to her level. I always thought it was rude for adults to talk down to kids. "I think I must be," I said, noticing how much she looked like a mini version of Mercedes. "Are you my friend?" she asked. "Forever and ever," I replied, and she grinned, scooted closer and hugged me, giving me a kiss on the cheek. I hugged and kissed her back. "What's your name, sweetie?" I asked. "Mattia," she said in her small voice. "But you can call me Maddie." I was stunned. Her name was like a girl version of mine. Was it intentional? I looked up at Mercedes, who smiled and nodded. She had named her daughter after me. I felt a bit shaken. Mercedes mouthed later to me, signaling we'd discuss it soon. "How old are you, Maddie?" I asked, moving on to the next typical adult question. 3, she answered quickly, struggling to show 3 fingers, so she used her other hand to help. I smiled and stood up, looking for my kids. Their ride had stopped and they were getting off, looking curiously at the strangers with me. I crouched down as they ran up. "Tommy, Judy, meet my good friends. This is Mercedes and her daughter, Maddie." The kids stared at each other, unsure of what to do. I suggested we get some pizza and refill our drinks. Judy initially wanted ice cream, but I gave her a look that made her drop the idea quickly. All 3 kids were soon sitting on one side of the booth, eating pizza and chatting as if they'd known each other forever. They started kicking the table to hear the thump. "People who kick tables don't get ice cream," I said loudly. The kicking stopped immediately. Between fetching pizza for the kids and retrieving my special order, Mercedes ended up sitting close to me. At first there was space between us, but she gradually moved closer until we were sitting hip to hip. It didn't bother me. I liked it. "So what are you doing here?" I asked, hoping to start a conversation. I didn't think to keep my voice down. "Had to find you," Maddie shouted, pointing at me. Her voice cut through the noise, surprising me. My chin might have dropped. I glanced at Mercedes, whose face was turning red as she avoided my gaze. Maddie, happy with the reaction, repeated herself and made faces. My kids joined in, of course. "Eat your pizza," Then we'll get ice cream, I told them softly. The promise of ice cream worked like magic. They quieted down and focused on their pizza. I looked at Mercedes, still blushing, but I was smiling, charmed by the kids. For the record, I've been trying to find you too, I said. But my guy couldn't track you down, you just disappeared. You were looking for me? She asked, surprised as her blush faded. She looked into my eyes. I read you were getting a divorce, I said cautiously. I tried to contact you but couldn't find any info. I even hired a private investigator, but he lost your trail in Billings, Montana. She grinned. Well, my uncle runs far. Great-uncle Walter picked me up and took me to his home in Wyoming. Maddie and I stayed with him and his girlfriend because my ex, Reggie, was being difficult. We needed to hide away for a while, Mercedes explained. Well, it worked, I said, grinning. My investigator said it was like you vanished. I'm really glad you came. How long can you stay? Mercedes looked into my eyes, leaning in closer. Until you kick us out, she whispered. Instead of answering, I kissed her softly, not too deeply, aware that 3 pairs of small eyes were watching us closely. What's that song? I asked with a smile. Until the 12th of never? I couldn't stop smiling as I kissed her again. When we turned back to the kids, they were still watching us but remained focused on finishing their pizza for the promise of ice cream. Mercedes and I ate our pizza one-handed, holding hands under the table. Where are you staying? I asked, already thinking about moving them to the ranch. I was sure I could convince her. She chuckled, glancing out the window. We just got here. Maddie, my investigator, and I were heading to the hotel when we saw your truck. He recognized it, so we stopped here, she explained, chuckling again. He's out there in his car with our luggage and everything in the trunk. I laughed, feeling like kids again. What I thought might be tricky, renewing our old love, felt natural and easy. Want to stay at the ranch with us? I asked gently. You still have it? I thought. She began. I nodded. Sort of. Same place, new house, I explained. Joe, she called out to her investigator, put our things in Matt's truck. Tell him to put them in the truck bed, I added. We'll pay extra for the help. Okay, she agreed with a smile, relaying my message. Daddy? My son Tom asked, looking at me. Are Maddie and Miss C.D. staying with us? I think so, I answered calmly. Mercedes has been my friend for a long time, and I think Maddie will be too. They can be your and Judy's friends. What do you think? Tom shrugged. Okay, he said, accepting it. Yeah, Judy cheered, turning to Maddie. You want to ride horses? Maddie's eyes widened. Horses? She exclaimed, thrilled by the idea. She nodded happily. We finished our pizza, leaving only some crusts and a lone mushroom slice. Ice cream cones were devoured, leaving sticky faces, and the kids played a few more games before we left. Joe placed Maddie's booster seat between Tom and Judy's. All 3 kids fell asleep a few minutes after we left the parking lot, their heads resting comfortably in the custom seats of the new pickup. Mercedes looked at the sleeping kids with a tender smile. With them asleep, she unbuckled her seatbelt and moved closer to me. If that isn't the cutest back seat full of kids in the world, I don't know what is, she declared. I glanced in the rearview mirror and had to agree. 3 adorable kids, 2 of whom were mine. Mercedes's voice softened. I'm so sorry about Sharon. It was so sad. She was a wonderful woman. She was a great wife and mother, I told her. But she was in so much pain when she finally passed. It was hard on Judy and Tom, but we're slowly moving on. Mercedes patted my arm and kissed my cheek. I have a message for you from Sharon, I remarked after a while. Mercedes looked a bit nervous. A message from a late wife can be unsettling, I said, easing her worries. A couple of months before she died, Sharon asked everyone to leave and made me lie beside her. She wanted to talk without straining. I pointed at a familiar building we were passing. Jesse's Barbecue, I said, where you and I first met. She recognized it immediately. Oh, honey, we have to go there soon, okay? She asked happily, calling me honey again, just like before. I liked it. We will, I assured her, patting her thigh. We will. Anyway, Sharon told me that when she was gone, she wanted me to find someone to love me and the kids. She made me promise. Mercedes looked down, so I continued. I don't want to scare you, but I promised her to love and to let me and my kids be loved. If that's not what you want, stop! Mercedes demanded, pointing at a park up ahead. I braked and pulled in without waking the kids. Dust drifted past the cab as Mercedes turned to me, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me. "I want you. I love you, and I'm never leaving," she swore. "I'll be here with you until you kick me out. Understand, Matthew James?" I kissed her back, holding her close. "You used the L word," I murmured. "We didn't do that last time, even though I wanted to." "I know," she said softly, her eyes full of the love she was finally ready to share. I wanted to say it too, but if we had, we'd never have been able to part ways and do what we needed to do. My voice was heavy with emotion, but this time I told her, "Little dove that calls at morning," her Cheyenne name. "I'm going to say it morning, noon, and night." "Say it," she insisted. "I love you," I replied without hesitation. "I love you too," she said, joy filling her voice. She sighed contentedly and rested her cheek on my shoulder. We sat there quietly, holding each other close, letting the moment speak for itself. I put the truck back in gear, and we got back on the highway. We didn't talk much as we drove. There was no need. Our relationship, though interrupted for years, seemed to pick up right where it left off. We were comfortable together, already making silent promises to each other. When we arrived at the ranch, the kids were full of energy after their nap. They wanted to do everything at once, but the horses down by the corral made it clear what the first activity would be. Mercedes and I took the kids to the corral with a small bag of apples. The kids fed the other horses while I saddled 2 Shetland ponies for Tommy and Judy. I told Maddie I'd get a pony for her too, which made her overjoyed. She gave me a big hug and plenty of kisses. Judy, proud of her new riding skills, rode her pony around the paddock by herself. I put Maddie on the saddle behind Tommy, and he guided their pony around, with Maddie holding tight to his waist. After a while, Tommy asked us to move Maddie in front of him so she could see better, and she loved it. She rewarded him with a big hug and a kiss on the cheek, which he accepted much like he did kisses from his little sister, with tolerance, but not much else. After the pony rides, the kids decided they wanted to go swimming. We unsaddled the ponies, watered them, brushed them, and let them back into the field. Then, I raced the kids back to the house and sent them upstairs to change into swimsuits. I half expected Mercedes to use the time to unpack, but she preferred to join us at the wading pool instead. We spent the rest of the afternoon watching the kids laugh and play in the water. As the sun began to set, I lit the grill and cooked steaks for Mercedes and me, with chicken drumsticks for the kids. We had baked potatoes, roasted asparagus tips, and mixed veggies to balance out the meal. After dinner, the kids spent their last bit of energy chasing fireflies in the backyard before bedtime. Mercedes and I took turns supervising their showers. My kids used the master bath while Mercedes took Maddie into the hallway bathroom. My plan was to wear them out completely so they'd sleep soundly through the night. Once the kids were asleep, we stood at their doors, watching them peacefully. I had my arm around Mercedes's waist, no more pretending we were just friends. "When the Bible talks about angels," I said, "I think they were modeled after sleeping children." Mercedes agreed, moving in front of me to wrap her arms around my waist. We shared our first private kiss since she and Stevie had left me years ago. Mercedes grabbed a nightgown from her suitcase before we walked down the hall to what had been my bedroom. It was ours now, without needing to say a word. We spent the night rediscovering each other. Early the next morning, she quietly got up, put on her nightgown, and went back to her bedroom where she still hadn't unpacked. We kept up the pretense of sleeping in separate rooms for almost 3 weeks. Mercedes would get up early each morning to return to her bed, but one day, the alarm didn't go off. The first sign of trouble came when all 3 kids jumped into bed with us, demanding breakfast. They didn't care who made the pancakes and sausage, as long as it was done quickly so they could watch cartoons. Mercedes was in a nightgown, and I was in my boxers. We were lucky we had put something on before falling asleep. I didn't want to think about what would have happened if they'd caught us without clothes. Way too many questions. I decided to change the batteries in the baby monitors in their rooms and turned up the volume so we'd hear them better next time. After we got caught by the kids, Mercedes officially moved into the master bedroom with me. To our surprise, none of the children seemed to care that Maddie's mom was now sleeping with Tommy and Judy's dad. They weren't upset at all, which we hadn't expected. We thought they might be confused or upset, so we sat them down and talked about what it meant to be a family. We explained that I wanted to be the daddy for all three of them, and Mercedes would be the mommy for all three. I reassured Tommy and Judy that their mother was in heaven watching over them, but Mercedes would take care of them every day. They accepted this easily because they already liked Mercedes. Maddie just wanted to know if I would still read her stories like before. When I promised to read even more and never leave, she was thrilled. We anticipated telling our parents would be challenging, expecting them to advise us to slow down and think things over. But we hoped they wouldn't completely oppose us. We visited my parents first. After hugging the kids, Tommy and Judy took Maddie to the backyard to show her the sandbox and swing set, giving Mercedes and me a chance to talk to my parents. "Mom," I said after taking a sip of lemonade, "this is Mercedes. We're going to get married." "Hi, Leah," Mercedes added before my parents could react. "We've met before on a video chat Matt set up years ago, do you remember?" Mom looked surprised, clearly trying to place the memory. She looked closely at Mercedes, searching her thoughts. "No, honey, I don't think I—" "Maybe if I remind you," Mercedes said with a smile. "I was the one with some unusual items that you saw in that chat." Suddenly, Mom remembered. "Oh, wow," she said, blushing. "The girl in the mirror." Dad, smiling, shook Mercedes' hand. "Nice to meet you, young lady," he said, clearly pleased. With Dad on our side, the conversation flowed easily. When Mercedes mentioned she was half Cheyenne, my parents were amazed and listened eagerly to her stories. By the end of the evening, they were trying hard to get Maddie to call them Grandma and Grandpa, which she did with ease. Maddie quickly adopted Tommy and Judy's grandparents as her own, since her other grandparents had always been distant. A week later, we flew to Philadelphia to meet Mercedes' parents. I enjoyed meeting them, and despite some initial concerns, they accepted us. I suspected Mercedes had told her mom about us years ago because her mom hugged me warmly even before we introduced ourselves. By the time we left, Tommy and Judy had another set of grandparents who loved spoiling them. Mercedes did call her ex-husband's parents to see if they wanted to see Maddie, but they declined. Next, all five of us flew to Anchorage to meet Tommy and Judy's other grandparents. The kids enjoyed the flight, charming the flight attendants, who gave them extra snacks and attention. Mercedes and I held hands and napped. Meeting Bruce and Judy, Tommy and Judy's maternal grandparents, went well, although I was nervous. They knew about my late wife's wishes for us to find a loving family, and while they were surprised at how quickly it had happened, they welcomed Mercedes with open arms. Meeting all the in-laws went better than we could have hoped. Mercedes and I fit together like puzzle pieces, clicking from the start. We never had a traditional first date. It went from just meeting to being completely together instantly. When she came back, our relationship resumed smoothly, always with an eye out for potential problems, but we didn't find any. 3 months after Mercedes and Maddie surprised us at the pizza place, we got married. Being married to Mercedes was an adventure, but a fun one. We agreed on most things and always had good talks when we didn't. When we had different opinions, we discussed them and made decisions together. Sometimes I saw things her way, and other times she came around to mine. The only challenging moments were when Mercedes wondered, what if? She sometimes worried that focusing so much on her dance career had been a mistake, and wondered where we would be if she hadn't left. But I saw it differently. The past was behind us, and we couldn't change it. Plus, we had 3 wonderful kids because of the choices we made, and neither of us would trade them for anything. Deep down, Mercedes knew that if she hadn't pursued her dancing, she would have regretted it, and any relationship we might have had back then wouldn't have lasted. Despite everything, we were married, had 3 lovely kids, and loved each other deeply. Our blended family fit together seamlessly. Mercedes became the mom to all 3 kids, and I was the dad. We worked together to set rules for the family and showed the kids love every day through our actions. One thing we made sure of was to have regular date nights, ensuring we kept our connection strong even as we balanced our busy lives with the demands of raising 3 kids. My parents, who the kids affectionately called Grandma and Grandpa, loved having the little ones over for sleepovers, sometimes even for entire weekends. When they couldn't babysit, we relied on 2 sisters, Amber and Pamela Ingram, who lived nearby. Years ago, I sold a horse to these 2 young girls, and now, in their late teens, They were perfect babysitters for our 3 energetic kids. We paid them well, and the kids adored them. During the week, the kids went to a small daycare with a great caregiver-to-child ratio. Mercedes and I both agreed it was important for them to play and work on projects with other children. Tommy, Judy, and Maddie loved it, and often came home with stories about their day, learning valuable lessons about getting along with others. Everything was going great, almost perfect. The overhead monitors at the airport showed that the 3:18 flight from Philadelphia had landed on time. Mercedes and I were waiting by the luggage carousel for her latest recruit for her dance school. She had told me it was someone she knew from her dance troupe who was also retiring. Mercedes had retired from touring after a bad ankle injury. Although the injury healed, her ankle wasn't strong enough for the rigorous demands of stage dancing and long hours of practice. So she transitioned to teaching, which she loved. As I watched people check in for their flights, I couldn't understand why most didn't use the kiosks. It didn't make sense to stand in long lines when touchscreens were available, but oh well. "Hey, did someone say this is National Fly Naked Day?" a soft voice asked behind me. I flinched and turned around, surprised to see Stephanie standing there. "Stephanie," I said, startled. "What are you doing here?" I glanced at my wife, who was smiling knowingly. It hit me. I had been set up. I'd deal with that later. I turned back to Stephanie, took her hands in mine, and held her at arm's length. She was still as striking as ever, captivating everyone around us. "I should have known," I said, realizing my mistake. "A new dance instructor from Philadelphia. I wasn't paying attention." "It's great to see you," I told Stephanie, giving her a kiss on the cheek. Then I noticed a little girl hiding behind Stephanie's leg. "Who's this?" I asked, stepping back. "Daphne, honey, can you say hello to Matt?" Stephanie said gently. I crouched down to be at eye level with the little girl, who was clearly Stephanie's daughter. Smiling, I held out my hand. "Nice to meet you, Daphne. Did your mom tell you we were friends a long time ago?" Daphne nodded slowly, then suddenly ran up to me and hugged me tightly. I wasn't ready for it and almost lost my balance, but I caught myself and gently hugged her back, giving her a small kiss on the cheek. "Let's play a game, okay?" "How old are you?" I asked. She held up 4 fingers, beaming happily. "And what's your full name?" "Daphne Mercedes Walton," she replied cheerfully. I quickly glanced at Mercedes. "Do you know that lady?" I asked, pointing at my wife. Daphne nodded eagerly. "Aunt Mercedes," she said. "I think Aunt Mercedes needs a hug too, don't you?" I suggested. She nodded again and rushed over to Mercedes, who bent down to pick her up, and they hugged tightly. Stephanie then walked up to me and hugged me tightly too. "I've missed you, Matt," she whispered, giving me a light kiss on the lips before moving over to Mercedes. The 3 of them shared a big group hug. A warning buzzer sounded, and the luggage carousel started moving. Stephanie pointed out her and Daphne's bags, and I grabbed them, placing them next to us. Stephanie and Mercedes each took a large suitcase and rolled them toward the exit, while I pulled 2 big duffel bags behind me. Daphne, with her tiny pink backpack, walked with us to the parking lot. I loaded everything into the back of the pickup truck, got into the driver's seat, and adjusted my Glock in its holster. Airports aren't supposed to be dangerous, but you never know. I started the engine and turned on the air conditioning. Mercedes and Stephanie were already deep in conversation, and Daphne was listening closely. "So, where are we headed?" I asked, even though I was pretty sure I knew the answer. "The guest room's ready," Mercedes answered calmly. I knew we were going home. I just wanted to hear it confirmed. Once at home, Daphne met Maddie and was introduced to Tommy and Judy. They welcomed her right away. Tommy asked if I knew any boys his age, but he didn't seem too bothered when I said no. Soon, all 4 kids were playing outside in the backyard, while Mercedes and Stephanie continued their conversation. Later that night, when we were alone in bed, I rolled Mercedes onto her back, leaning over her after a long cuddle. "Talk," I said. "About Stephanie?" she asked innocently. "About Stephanie." I looked at Mercedes seriously. "What's going on?" I asked firmly. She smiled, clearly having anticipated this question. "Stephanie needed a job, and I had one for her. She's like a little sister to me, you know that. I love her, and I wanted her to work with me at the studio. She agreed to come down here, and I want her to live with us so we can stay close. Is that okay?" Her explanation was rushed, but it made sense. Nothing about it worried me. except for one thing. But the last time you brought Stephanie here, it was to push us apart, I said bluntly. Is there a reason you'd want to do that now? Mercedes chuckled softly, not the least bit upset. She wrapped her arms around my neck and kissed me. That didn't work out so well back then, did it? She whispered. You and Stephanie got along so well that we ended up like the Three Musketeers. Well, not really. The truth was, during those weeks with Mercedes, the three of us had become very close, not exactly how musketeers are portrayed in stories. I shifted uncomfortably, and Mercedes tightened her grip with her legs. Mercedes, I began. We're married now. We're not single. We can't just... She cut me off, whispering in my ear. Stephanie's here to work with me, and I love her. She won't come between us. Understand? I hesitated, needing to think about it, but before I could say anything, Mercedes pulled me in for another kiss, making it impossible to continue the conversation. In the end, it all worked out. We became Mercedes' version of the Three Musketeers again, with our old dynamic, minus the complications. Mercedes and I were a regular married couple, and Stephanie was our house guest, sort of. Stephanie took on a lot of the household chores, even though she was technically just a guest. We divided the work at home evenly, and since we no longer had a working ranch, there wasn't much to do outside. I usually handled those tasks with some help from the women. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Mercedes and Stephanie would head to the studio to teach adult dance classes. On Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, they taught dance to kids after school. My job was to make breakfast for our 4 children every morning, get them dressed for daycare if I had to work, or into play clothes if we had a free day. When the weather was good, the kids played outside while I watched them from the deck, sometimes even joining in their pretend games. On Tuesday and Thursday evenings, after an early supper, I took the kids to their dance classes. The girls loved learning to dance with Mercedes and Stephanie, though Tommy wasn't as enthusiastic but still enjoyed it sometimes. Our routine was smooth, but we kept things lively and exciting. Mercedes and I often went out on dates, and Stephanie would join us for dinner, dancing, concerts, or movies. We also got involved with local charities. One night, we were invited to a ball at Kyle Mulvaney's home to raise money for local historical sites. The Mulvaneys were very influential in the city. I managed to get an extra invite so Stephanie could join Mercedes and me. The event was black tie optional. Mercedes wore a long seafoam green gown with an off-the-shoulder design and a slit that showed her leg. She looked stunning. Stephanie wore a royal blue gown that complemented her blonde hair, with a deep V-neck and a slit on the left side. I wore a black tuxedo with a white formal shirt, black bow tie, cummerbund, and shiny Wellington boots. The cummerbund helped conceal the Glock 38 I carried for protection. Something I did often because I had a concealed carry permit and felt safer with it. We attracted a lot of attention when we arrived, especially since Mercedes and Stephanie looked breathtaking. We also drew eyes when we started dancing. Mercedes and Stephanie had been professional dancers for years and were now teaching at their studio. They wanted me to enjoy dancing too, so they taught me a lot more than the basic steps I knew. Together, we created a new dance routine for 2 women and 1 man, with me as their partner. After months of practice, I felt confident enough to have fun on the dance floor. It was great. I was the center of attention with 2 beautiful women dancing around me, and more people noticed us as we moved across the floor. By the end of the song, we found ourselves near the stage where the band played. The band leader smiled and clapped for us, and when I turned around, I realized that many people had cleared the floor to watch us. We received nice applause for our performance. I bowed, and Mercedes and Stephanie curtsied, smiling. After the dance, we made our way to the bar. Dancing with those 2 women had been fun, but it sure made me hot and sweaty. We joined a group of men and women at one end of the long bar. Mercedes and Stephanie were getting tons of smiles and compliments as we cooled off. I decided to be helpful and headed to the other end of the bar to grab 2 glasses of white wine for the girls and a bottle of flavored water for myself. As the bartender was finishing up, I heard a commotion where I had left Mercedes and Stephanie. "Let's see them, lady! Come on! You've been showing off all night!" The voice was loud and aggressive. I quickly turned around to see a short, heavy-set man harassing Stephanie, grabbing her dress and tearing it down. Her dress ripped, exposing her breasts. Before I even had time to think, I was behind the man who was oblivious to my approach. Stephanie locked eyes with me, remaining calm, trusting me to handle the situation. I grabbed the man's shoulder, spun him around, and delivered a hard punch to his stomach. As he doubled over, I brought my knee up swiftly, connecting with his chin. He hit the floor with a thud, unconscious and bleeding. I considered kicking him while he was down, but it wasn't necessary. He was already out cold. I turned to Stephanie, who immediately fell into my arms, holding me tightly. "You okay, honey?" I asked softly, pulling back slightly to check her face. She nodded, pressing her cheek against my chest, her grip around my waist tightening. After a moment, I took off my jacket and draped it over Stephanie's shoulders to cover her. The place was in chaos, with people buzzing around, each offering their version of what had just happened. Not everyone had seen the full incident, so the stories varied wildly. I scanned the room for Mercedes and found her beside me, looking concerned but composed. Mercedes held up her phone, her voice cutting through the noise. "I got it all on video. That guy assaulted Stephanie right here. I recorded everything." The room fell silent at her words. I nodded at Mercedes and began guiding Stephanie towards the stairs that led to the exit. Just before we reached the steps, a tall, broad man in a tight tuxedo blocked our path. "Mr. Mulvaney wants to see the lady's phone," he said firmly, pointing to a man standing by a column who looked furious. "No," I replied, equally firm. "That's not happening." I tried to move past him, but he extended his arm, placing his hand on my chest while gesturing at Mercedes with the other. I moved to push past him, but he grabbed my shoulder. "Look down," I said in a low, warning tone. He ignored me, confident in his position. I prodded his belly with my Glock, which I had concealed under my cummerbund. I said, "Look down." This time he complied, and his face changed when he realized the gun was aimed at his heart. "If I pull this trigger, you're done. Understand?" I said calmly. He nodded, raising his hands in surrender. "You carrying a gun?" I asked. He nodded again. "Small of my back." "Take it out slowly with your left hand, using just your thumb and forefinger," I instructed. He carefully did as I said. I took his gun with my left hand, keeping my Glock trained on him. The people around us gasped as they realized what was happening. "Get on your belly," I ordered. Without hesitation, he dropped to the ground. "Stephanie, Mercedes," I said, motioning for them to move. I then lowered my gun, keeping my finger off the trigger, ensuring no accidental shots. The three of us quickly ascended the steps, crossed the lobby, and exited the building. As we walked out, I dropped the bodyguard's gun on a shelf in the lobby. The valet, unaware of the chaos inside, promptly brought our SUV around. We drove away quietly, without further incident. A few miles down the road, police cars sped past us, heading towards the event, but they didn't give us a second glance. We continued on to McCready Airfield, which I had owned for almost a year, keeping its old name because the weekend pilots liked it. We parked the SUV next to the hangar and boarded our twin-engine Cessna. Within 42 minutes, we were safely back at the ranch. We had a strong security system in place, so I felt confident no one could bother us there. But that wasn't the end. The next afternoon, detectives from the city, having figured out who was involved, teamed up with the county sheriff to visit us. 6 vehicles pulled up to our main house. The sheriff himself came to the door, respectfully holding his hat in his hands. He knew my dad had been the county sheriff during some tough times, and many people still remembered him. Seeing my dad, the sheriff was polite and respectful. Inside, Stephanie, Mercedes, and I gave written statements and answered questions from the city cops. We also handed over the video Mercedes had taken on her phone. When the youngest detective tried to ask a tricky question, one of our lawyers intervened, halting the questioning. He firmly stated that we would not be answering any more questions. The young detective received some frustrated looks from his colleagues, realizing they were at a dead end. Among them was a representative from the district attorney's office, who seemed to be familiar with our legal team. When a detective looked to her for assistance, she simply shrugged, knowing that our lawyers were top-notch and well compensated for their work. Another part of our legal team was already at the DA's office, pressing them on why the man who attacked Stephanie hadn't been arrested and charged with attempted assault. They were also pushing for additional charges, including one for sheer stupidity. 2 weeks and 4 days later, the situation was resolved. The assailant turned out to be Mr. Mulvaney's youngest son. Mulvaney initially tried to defend his son by blaming Stephanie, but our lawyers swiftly shut down any attempts at victim blaming, making it clear they were prepared to tear him apart in court. Faced with the threat of a legal battle they couldn't win, Mulvaney's team backed down. The DA eventually charged the man with 3 felonies and several misdemeanors. Multiple videos of the incident circulated, none of which favored the Mulvaneys. The man ultimately pleaded guilty to attempted assault and received a 6-month jail sentence, narrowly avoiding a longer term but still earning a felony record. Initially, the DA had considered charging him with a misdemeanor to help the Mulvaney family, but our legal team ensured the media was aware of the situation, forcing the DA to reconsider. They also tried to accuse me of brandishing a weapon, but we argued that the bodyguard's actions were dangerous and my response was justified. A video showed the bodyguard pushing me, which ended any claims against me. Had the bodyguard succeeded in taking Mercedes's phone, it would have led to additional charges for him. Our lawyers were almost disappointed that the case didn't drag on longer, as they saw potential for more work. Stephanie's lawsuit against the Mulvaneys for creating a hostile environment was quickly settled out of court, making her a millionaire. Mulvaney even covered her legal fees. With the situation resolved, I stopped spending heavily on legal fees, and peace returned to our ranch. I foolishly thought that peace would last forever. A few weeks later, my parents came by to pick up all 4 kids, Tommy, Judy, Maddie, and Stephanie's daughter, Daphne, for a long weekend camping trip in their big RV. While I didn't consider sleeping in a nice bed inside an RV to be real camping, everyone else seemed to enjoy it. Based on the video chat we had with them earlier that evening, the kids were having a blast, and my parents couldn't stop smiling, thrilled to have their grandkids all to themselves. I was doubly surprised when Stephanie walked into the bedroom right behind my wife. Both women were dressed in sheer black nightgowns that left little to the imagination. I quickly made sure the blanket was pulled up, feeling a bit awkward. "Matt, dear, we have a problem," Mercedes said in a serious tone. I could almost hear Scooby-Doo's row-row in my head. Mercedes sat on the bed beside me, grabbing the TV remote, while Stephanie sat on the other side, calm and beautiful. "Okay," Mercedes said, starting the DVD player and scrolling through the options until she selected a clip labeled simply, Stephanie. She clicked on it, clearly having prepared this ahead of time. "Watch this," she commanded. It was the video she had taken during the Mulvaney incident. I watched as the man in the video goofed around in front of Stephanie before grabbing the top of her dress and ripping it down, exposing her chest. She didn't scream, but others in the background did. Then I appeared, taking the man down quickly and effectively, without using excessive force. I had always been proud of how I handled that situation, enough to stop the threat, but not too much. Our lawyers had liked it too, as it left no room for anyone to charge me with anything. The clip ended with me covering Stephanie with my jacket. "Did you see it?" Mercedes asked, her voice filled with emotion. I wasn't sure what she was referring to, other than the obvious. "I've seen it before, yes," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral, even though I was unsure of what Mercedes was driving at. Mercedes replayed the video in slow motion. "Watch Stephanie's face, watch her eyes," she instructed. I focused on Stephanie's expression this time, but I still didn't see anything new. I shrugged reluctantly, feeling a bit lost. I wanted to contribute to the discussion, but I had to admit I wasn't sure what Mercedes wanted me to see. Mercedes crawled up on the bed, and I shifted under the blanket to make room for her, moving closer to Stephanie, who remained on top of the blanket. I was still puzzled, trying to grasp what Mercedes was trying to show me. My wife restarted the video in slow motion, pointing out something I hadn't noticed before. "You see?" Mercedes whispered. "Stevie isn't afraid of that guy. She's not even looking at him. She's looking at you, coming to save her. See?" She was right. In the video, Stephanie wasn't focused on the man harassing her or the damage to her dress. Instead, her eyes were locked in the direction where I suddenly appeared. She didn't flinch when I dealt with him. When I turned back to her after it was over, she simply tilted her face up to look into my eyes, wrapped her arms around me, and tucked her face into my chest. Mercedes paused the video at the moment Stephanie looked up at me. Then she leaned over and kissed me gently. "Baby," she said softly. "Stevie wasn't afraid because she knew her knight in shining armor was coming. And you did. Look at how she's looking at you. My sister is in love with you, and you know it." I took a deep breath, unable to deny what Mercedes was saying. It was true, even though I had been denying it to myself. Before I could respond, Mercedes played another short clip. It showed me quickly taking off my tuxedo jacket, placing it over Stephanie's shoulders and hugging her close. She paused the video with me looking down at Stephanie. "And darling," Mercedes murmured, "you love her too?" I was speechless. What she said was true, and I couldn't argue with it. The video made it undeniable. "Honey," I began, my voice strained. "I would never—" I stopped, glancing at Stephanie, not wanting to hurt her but needing to reassure my wife. "Baby, I just could never cheat on you. I wouldn't do that." Mercedes, who had been busy while I struggled to process everything, dimmed the lights and let her nightgown fall to the floor. Stephanie did the same, both smiling at me. They slipped under the blanket and cuddled close, Stephanie on my left, Mercedes on my right. Mercedes propped herself up on her elbow. "Baby," she whispered, "I know you'd never cheat on me. You're not that kind of person." "But," I started to say, but she shushed me with a kiss. "Look at us, Matt," Mercedes said calmly. "No one's cheating here. No one's lying. Everything is out in the open, right?" Stephanie leaned in and kissed me on the lips. When I didn't stop her, she kissed me again, this time longer. "I do love you, Matt," she whispered. "I have since forever and always will." "See?" Mercedes said. "She loves you, I love her, she loves me, and I love you, and you love me, and you love Stephanie, don't you?" I do. "Yes," I admitted, and since you caused Stephanie's divorce, we have to make this right. You see that, right?" "Wait, how did I cause—" I protested, confused. "Because he wasn't you and didn't know how to be you," Stephanie said softly. "I didn't know I was looking for you all along. It wasn't fair to him, but I didn't know, so he never had a chance. It was too late for us from the start," she said sadly. "But now I'm here with you and Mercedes, and I promise we will be the happiest 3 people in the world." I sighed deeply, knowing how complicated this could get. "Do you know how complicated this is going to be?" I asked. Neither of them was listening, but I felt their hands moving under the covers. "Yep," Mercedes mumbled happily from my right side. "Yes," Stephanie chimed in from the left. "But we'll work through it. It'll be wonderful." And mostly, it was. We had our arguments. Both women were strong-willed, and I could be stubborn. But we made a solid promise to always talk things out and never go to bed angry. Sometimes we stayed up very late, but we always resolved things before turning off the lights. We shared our love in different ways, sometimes all 3 of us together, sometimes just 2 of us. When all 3 of us were together, we took turns making sure everyone felt loved. We decided we needed a lot of time together, maybe more than most couples, and we managed this by letting my parents or teenage babysitters watch the kids often. My parents adored the children and wanted to see them as much as possible. When my parents couldn't babysit, we turned to Amber and Pamela, who loved our kids and were well compensated for their time. As life moved on, Pam left for college and Amber got married, but they always recommended other reliable local girls, ensuring we never lacked for babysitters until the kids started school. Eventually, I adopted both Maddie and Daphne. Maddie, named after me, was easily given up by Mercedes' ex-husband, who never wanted children. Daphne's father followed suit, surrendering his parental rights as his focus shifted to his new family. When Stephanie and Mercedes expressed a desire for more children, I was initially hesitant, thinking 4 was enough, but they convinced me otherwise. Soon, Stephanie had another girl, and Mercedes gave birth to a boy. A couple of years later, Stephanie had a boy, and Mercedes added another girl to our family. I loved all of them deeply, and my life became a tapestry of love, laughter, and the joy of raising our expanding family. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.